August 23, 2025, at 4:35 a.m. pre-dawn. At Sevastopol Harbor in Crimea, a Ukrainian PD-2 reconnaissance UAV was loitering quietly at 4,900 feet. Slung beneath its fuselage, the USG-405 infrared sensor burned bright like an all-seeing eye, catching every twitch across the area. Some 6.2 miles offshore, the silhouette of the Hengyang 9, a ship owned by China's Guangxi Shanghai Shipping, was steadily closing for berth. Thermal cameras pierced the decks, registering unusually low heat signatures, proof this was not a munitions hold and not a container of explosives. Instead, they revealed something far more troubling, an illicit transaction between Beijing and Moscow. Inside a camouflaged field command post on the Mykolaiv coast, 211 miles away, a technical team codenamed Firestorm from the 39th Brigade stared, unblinking, at every pixel. They hard-locked the Hengyang 9 and uplinked target coordinates by satellite straight to Kiev headquarters. The operations commander issued a single order. 3 R-360 Neptune cruise missiles were brought online, elevating from USPU-360 launchers mounted on KRAZ-7634 trucks. Fueling, electronic checks, and interlocks flipped to combat ready. An encrypted execute flowed into the flight computers of all 3 Neptunes, their MS-400 engines lit, coughing a blue-white plume. Roughly 1,600 horsepower, hurling each missile skyward to a peak of 590 miles per hour. Ukraine's 3-pronged spear pointed to the PD-2 designated kill box, waters around Sevastopol. Holding an ultra-low altitude of 49 feet, the trio rode INS plus GNSS guidance at 570 miles per hour, hugging the sea surface. At 4:58, they struck the first picket, the long-range I-91N6 radar coverage. The Trident dropped lower to 32 feet and eased to 560 miles per hour, disappearing under a surveillance net worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The R-360's skin was no dead metal. It's a 3-layer structural stack, thermal isolation and anti-vibration inside, aluminum titanium strength members, topped by a radar-absorbent outer coat. Epoxy resin mixed with ferrite powder and carbon fiber, approximately 2 millimeters thick. At sea skimming height, its radar cross-section fell to approximately 0.05 square meters, about a hand grenade. 2 of the missiles were essentially ghosts on the 91N6 scopes. In Russia's C-2 air defense node, operators saw only a few faint smudges, insufficient to trigger a full threat posture. Sea clutter scattered the returns. The ram finish kept reflections so weak that 91N6E couldn't discriminate real missile from surface noise. The 3 Neptunes pressed on, not because they were literally invisible, but because the outer layer's reaction chain had been desynchronized. The compressed timeline opened a seam wide enough for a breakthrough toward occupied shores. At 4:59, the PD-2 kept orbiting over Sevastopol's piers, streaming anomalies to the field post. The ship, stamped with Xi Jinping's supply footprint, was hauling GNSS modules, EO/IR cameras, microprocessors, FPGAs, and antennas, the brains of modern electronics, engines, UAV fuselages, propellers, gyros, enough to assemble an entire attack drone flotilla. Even fighter jet control chips, cockpit components, and large CNC machines for aerospace parts, all sourced in China, shipped by sea, now about to dock at Sevastopol, the heart of the Black Sea Fleet. Meanwhile, the Trident of Neptune slid into the protection zone of Russia's S-400 and S-300 clusters. On paper, a ripple of 48 N6E2 and 48 N6DM interceptors could wipe all 3 intruders in seconds. But the Trident's commander didn't flinch. He understood the math. To shoot, the defenders must first detect and lock, and that is where the seam lay. Kyiv's early Christmas presents surfed the radar coverage almost unseen, but this safety window was brittle. A single guidance glitch or odd spectral burp could light them up for S-400. The commander ran the endgame like a master of closed positions, fast, cold, and stingy with the enemy's decision time. Inside each Neptune, guidance stacked in layers. INS stabilized the instantaneous trajectory while GNSS dripped dual-band L1/L5 updates, pulling fixes from 31 satellites, eyes in orbit roughly 12,400 miles up. Every 10 seconds, the 1.57542 gigahertz feed refreshed the nav solution, giving centimeter-grade steering to pin the missiles to the C-skim, thread detection cells, and slide through the S-400/S-300 effective scan volumes. Back in Russia's C-2, 3 odd streaks finally materialized amidst the oceanic noise. A chill ran through the crew. Reaction time was too thin. They could only acknowledge guess and try to push what they had upward in the chain of command. This trident was no desperate lash-out. It flowed from months of reconnaissance, intel collection, and methodical planning. Weeks earlier, Ukraine's network had flagged a pattern of Chinese freighters frequenting the area. Not cruise ships, not warships. Blood pumps for Moscow's proxy war against Kiev. The pattern library said that today, a particularly important consignment from Beijing would land on the Black Sea's southern approaches. Russia's fresh hope now steaming toward the pier. At 5:01, the 3 Neptunes, trimmed to 530 miles per hour at approximately 32 feet, entered MCON, complete emission silence, then shifted to an ultra-low coastal ingress. Shoreline Buchem 2 batteries snapped awake. In their bunker, the pack of hounds crewed 9 S-36 acquisition radar hard, sweeping and resweeping. 9 A-317 launchers slewed. Interceptors snapped aloft like iron fangs. But Neptune isn't a souvenir shop toy, and Ukraine's Firestorm team aren't amateurs. They popped sophisticated decoy cartridges on each missile. A burst spread of radar-reflective fibers and composite chaff blossomed into phantom tracks within seconds. Buchem 2 fired on confident locks. The sector lead in C2 barked Salvo 2. Dual 9 M317 launches vaulted at Mach 4, white scars slicing the sky. This wasn't a gentleman's duel. In the cacophony, decoys, clutter, and spoofed aim points, the Neptune slipped the net. Pairs of 9 M317S proximity detonated into chaff, smearing the air with expanding smoke rosettes. On the waterfront, Chinese and Russian handlers thought they'd survived and rushed to resume offload. They were wrong. Only the decoys had popped. The 3 Neptunes were still coming, straight through the veil, for the harbor. At 5:01:30, all 3 missiles punched into the harbor envelope. At this range, coastal air defenses had essentially exhausted their recovery window. One clean strike, on the right compartments, would be enough to snap an entire support chain Moscow had bet on. Geran 2 suicide drones, starved. Covert ISR UAVs, grounded. Those smart microelectronics that make drones think would revert to dead metal. Fighter aircraft, either grounded awaiting retrofit or forced into sorties without navigation like blind birds over a night sea. Desperate, a Panzer S-1 slewed hard, vomiting 30 millimeters in a metal rain. Close-in chaos now, not the distant hiss of mid-range SAMs. Sparks and greasy smoke as the turret flooded 5,000 RPM across the approach cone. Too late. The intercept streaks only scratched paint on the 3 R-360s before the missiles did what they came to do. In the terminal phase, seconds from dive, the INS/GNSS stack yielded to the active radar seeker. With a firm lock, the guidance made last-second course trims to hit the desired ship sections. Evasive micromaneuvers jittered the path to slough off any final jamming or obstacles. Altitude snapped to approximately 16 feet. Speed nudged 560 miles per hour, enough to drive the HE warhead through the hull and punch a clean wound. But this wasn't about neat drilling. It was about the secondary waiting behind it. Each Neptune carried approximately 330 pounds of explosive. On burst, it produced approximately 6,300 degrees Fahrenheit at the core, ballooning a fire sphere, shrapnel and overpressure clearing everything out to hundreds of meters. At 5:02, R-360 No. 1 knifed into the midships of Hengyang 9. The detonation snapped the whole harbor awake. The once quiet steel behemoth at the quay became the epicenter of catastrophe. Neptune's punch tore open the flank, ripping a long gash. Approximately 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit flames roared instantly, black smoke jetting from the holds. Soldiers and stevedores on deck were incinerated almost at once. Others on the pier were flung by shock and scything fragments. Stacked containers toppled and ignited, plunging into the sea. Electronics and steel frames bobbed to the surface amid burning debris. Water poured into lower compartments. The hull took a list, tilting in the blaze's red wash. Thick black plumes rose off the decks like funeral standards, turning the freighter into a burning iron carcass. A monument to material loss and the fragility of giant assets in modern asymmetric war. 30 seconds later, through wailing fire alarms and hazard sirens, R-360 No. 2 seared past the ship's flaming bridge and slammed into the Sevastopol pier itself. A concrete finger and crane array thrust out to sea, where freighters, tank farms, and vehicles converged like arteries of a local economy, detonated in a single murderous breath. The quay ripped open. Pier segments shattered. Cranes twisted like broken arms. Forklift rails bowed, and the apron fractured into deep, cratered mouths. A stack of in-transit containers flash-ignited, creating a constellation of secondary fires that made firefighting close to hopeless. The air stank of burned metal and fuel. Flames jumped to auxiliary berths, storage houses, and pier infrastructure. Shockwaves flipped port trucks like toys. Not finished, the final Neptune streaked to the fuel farm, the closing flourish of Kiev's performance. It hit the tank farm like bottle fury. A white-hot blast turned the roof into red glowing sheet and split the air with thunder. Adjacent tanks, crushed and ruptured by pressure, spewed burning fuel columns. A chain of sympathetic detonations drowned the entire harbor in fire. Viscous black smoke rolled up, a ceiling over the bay. The reek of petroleum and hot metal clotted the lungs. The ground shivered like a short, sharp quake. Giant tongues of flame licked cranes and conveyors, turning the loading system into molten scrap, paralyzing port operations at once. The losses weren't just tanks. Storage and throughput vanished for weeks or months, along with a looming oil spill and enduring contamination risk. In the chaos, sirens, shouts, rapid-fire detonations, the first fire brigades punched into the zone. Silver foam tenders barreled down the concrete spine of the pier. Firefighters hunched under heavy foam lines, but near the tank batter, heat drove them back. Foam atomized on contact with geysering fuel. Flame tongues climbed higher than any water jet. The heat pressed masks into faces like a vice. They halted on the outer ring, shifting to evacuation and perimeter alarms. Direct attack on the blaze was impossible. Hundreds of tons of electronics, frames, and weapons production machinery that Russia had imported now lay as charred fragments across the quay, the water, and within the slowly sinking ship. It was a direct hit on an already fraying economy, and a laceration to national pride. One decisive strike against port infrastructure had inverted the supply picture in a heartbeat. Power and water systems were damaged. Operations would be frozen for a long stretch. Transport links clogged. Supply chains snapped, and the port's once iconic aura of regional security stood as living proof of strategic infrastructure loss. In a war zone, flags are fabric. For Kiev, any ship riding the logistics corridor with materiel for Russia, Chinese or otherwise, becomes part of the battle space. Nationality doesn't matter when military advantage and national survival are at stake. In asymmetric logic, targets are graded by strategic effect, not by the colors snapping on their mast. China stayed silent, issuing no official comment, as is its habit. Bury losses in shadow and seal the information seams. For Beijing, silence is not only diplomacy, it's a curtain to hide setbacks, preserving a theater-managed image of invulnerability at home and abroad. Mission completed.
At 21:05 on September 30th, 2025, amid the Zaporizhzhia battle space, a Russian squad at the strategic Tokmak checkpoint dropped their guard entirely, lowering personal weapons to stage an impromptu field concert celebrating victory in the dead of night. None of them knew that from 6,500 feet, Ukraine's all-seeing eye was quietly watching every move. A PD-2 reconnaissance UAV had loitered there for hours, streaming the checkpoint's entire imagery back to servers. 30 miles to the northwest, 30 FPV kamikaze drones lifted off simultaneously under absolute MCON. No radios, no emissions, each carrying more than 2.2 pounds of TNT. Their single objective: turn the Russians' concert into Ukraine's own light show. Launched 15 seconds apart from ground rails, they arrowed toward Tokmak, hugging the Earth's curvature, completely invisible to enemy long-range radar. Inside Ukraine's covert field control room, the Delta 30 technical team of the 412th Uncrewed Systems Regiment watched calmly from their consoles, vectoring the strike package across the terrain. The PD-2's nose-mounted USG-405 IR pod exposed everything the Russians thought they'd concealed: revetments, AFVs, and clusters of troops. It took only seconds for a single attack order to go out from the command post. In this grammar of war, there is no room for indulgence. On Kiev's ground, every hostile silhouette must be erased. Across the line, the 30 FPV drones, hot-rodded from civilian DJI Mavic platforms, received the command. Each airframe was stripped down and stiffened, batteries topped, and a shaped HE incendiary warhead slung beneath. They drove on at a steady 56 miles per hour, holding just 165 feet AGL, riding a nap of the earth profile and using terraces and tree lines to mask their approach. As the swarm cut across the 91 N6E long-range scan, composite skins, minuscule RCS, and ground-hugging paths sank their returns to near zero. On the ops scopes, contacts flickered and died, ghosts passing a dark window, nowhere near enough to trigger an alert. In Russia's C2 room, the duty crew were still bathing in triumph. No alarms, no anomalous chain of events. But in mere tens of seconds, that threat, a small, fast, precise strike team, would spill into Tokmak and turn their cocksure confidence to ash. At 21:07, the PD-2 didn't just see, it penetrated. USG-405 IR cut through thin partitions, peeling back every motion in the compound, dense heat signatures from clustered troops, thermal pools inside surrounding armored hulls. This wasn't a small target set. Tokmak was a strategic choke, the key checkpoint at Zaporizhzhia's gateway. Here, infantry massed alongside MTLBS and BTRS. Here, too, ran a lifeline of logistics, dozens of resupply runs daily, hauling fuel, ammo, and reserve elements, all spilling down from Moscow to pump blood into the eastern fronts. A precise blow here wouldn't be just a blast, it would snap an artery. If the plan held, within seconds the Tokmak node would be fully paralyzed. No patrols, no armored maneuver, local C2 sites cut cold. Moscow's supply dispatcher would plunge into confusion, convoys would detour long, and the chain, from fuel to shells, would stall for at least weeks, opening a tactical gap Kiev could exploit. That night on the map, Tokmak wasn't merely a red dot, it was a heart about to drown in fire. At 21:10, the kamikaze swarm had shortened the gap, 18 miles to go. On a ridgeline 9 miles away, a 9S-18 radar van suddenly crackled awake. The alarm rattled its cabin. The tired Russian crew paled as a spray of unstable micro-returns crawled along the scope's rim like a flock bursting across the glass. They juiced the transmitter, widened bandwidth, and threw an electronic net to tag the source. With bearings up, rough coordinates pushed at once to a Book M2 battery. Warning lights strobed like mad. A 9S-36 fire control radar locked the track and painted the swarm. 9 M317 interceptors kicked free of the rails with a roar, tearing toward the tiny heat spots on screen. But at the decisive instant, the script flipped. The drones, following pre-programmed logic, dropped altitude in unison to just 100 feet. The ground-skimming paths and tiny RCS muddled seeker logic. IR and radar heads sucked in warped, scattered returns. The 9 M317s screamed overhead, missing by meters, iron maces swinging blind. With no lock confirmed, the safeties tripped, self-destruct. The 9 M317s burst in midair, exhaling smoke and shrapnel that clattered to the empty earth below like an iron rain. At 21:17, the FPV swarm hit its pre-planned kill box. On Delta 30's board, each track flipped red, inside the dead zone. The formation shoved down to 65 feet and split into 2 spearheads, each pre-assigned: the dispatch center, command huts, and the AFV park. Rotor wine built, slicing the night, power to max, pale streaks spearing the checkpoint. Range 0.6 miles, only now did a Panzer S-1 crew sense the wrongness. The radar suddenly bloomed with a mass of tiny returns. Too close, too low. The crew panicked, whipped the twin 2 A38 M30mm guns, and spat hundreds of airburst rounds, clawing burning ribbons across the night. 2 drones took hits, flamed out, and crashed just meters from the perimeter fence. 2 little bonfires. That was the last comfort Russia would get. The other 28 held speed, pushed through the metal rain, and rolled into terminal. Spearhead 1 drove at the checkpoint core, where PD-2 flagged the hottest thermal clusters, the main command and coordination block. In a blink, 5 drones bored through the thin concrete shell. Shaped HE incendiary warheads popped. Each charge carried greater than 2.2 pounds TNT, cinched under the belly with tape and zip ties. At the detonation center, temperatures spiked greater than 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. A fireball engulfed the command core. Overpressure blew doors, roof, and the nearby sentry off his feet. The first shockwave fanned beyond 656 feet, scything command huts and temporary sheds. Inside, Russians panicked, some clutching rifles and running, others dropping in smoke and flame. A supposedly impregnable node with layered sensors now tore like tissue. Immediately, the rest of Spearhead 1 piled in, driving into rubble and setting off in near unison, a stack of overlapping blasts that drowned Tokmak's center in fire. From above, the PD-2's IR camera captured a horror tableau, a mushrooming fireball nearly 260 feet across, swallowing the central grid. Its rim burned white, heat so fierce the IR bloomed out for 3 straight seconds. Inside 330 feet, everything was ash. Spearhead 1, in under 15 seconds, had erased Tokmak's command center. On the Ukrainian side, Delta 30's underground screens shivered with fresh thermal blooms, secondary fires, ammo cooks, hotspots spreading. As the command core dissolved, Spearhead 2 rolled its nose toward the AFV park, MTLBS, BTRS, and a row of support trucks, fuel bowsers, and ammo carriers. The first 5 FPVs smashed into the lanes between vehicles, metal on metal, then sharp concussions like a drumline of alarms. Shaped charges slit tank lids, ripped open fuel bowsers, a pressurized stream flashed to flame, bands of fire licking around wheels. A bowser blew like a fireball. Flame jets torched the truck beside it and seeded a string of secondaries. MTLBS and BTRS, built to shrug impacts, became red-hot iron lumps. One blast through a fuel bay popped a front wheel and snapped the suspension. A BTR flipped, skated, and stopped with a chunk of glacis torn out. On the PD-2's thermal feed, hot spots bloomed like spilled ink, secondaries chained. A small ammo shed behind the row took a fragment. Its small pop deepened into a throat-punching rumble. Shards hammered nearby vehicles, igniting more, while the fires twisted into a thick black column. Rescue crews and maintenance hands tried to push forward, but smoke, heat, and shrapnel turned the path into a death maze. A soldier trapped in a cab clawed at the latch, burned and groaning. Others yanked go bags, magazines spilling across oil-slick ground. Field med lanes overloaded at once. No bandages, no stretchers, medevac birds kept away by a locally denied air picture. On the war map, Spearhead 2 didn't just wreck kit, it plowed the supply artery, leaving Tokmak's remainder in a waiting-to-die state. Without immediate resupply, frontline units would lose sustainment in days. The end picture was a soot-blacked pad of glowing metal, stray detonations still rolling, squads clawing through debris for papers, radios, anything to pull them out of the nightmare. When the dust settled, Tokmak wasn't a checkpoint, it was a shattered emblem. Photos of charred vehicles, black pillars, and gutted warehouses became media fodder, racing across channels and shaking the conceit that everything can be protected. Higher up, reports logged personnel and materiel losses far beyond initial estimates. Rotation and resupply decisions had to be rewritten. In Delta 30's field room, no one cheered, no gloating, only the cold feel of a job finished. A short message went out. The battlespace map records greater than 90% of the checkpoint leveled, the central C2 node completely erased, 14 BTRS/MTLBS destroyed, 9 logistics trucks reduced to charred frames. The rear depot exploded for 23 minutes, spawning hundreds of small fires that smoldered until dawn. Casualties unknown, estimates 20+ Russian KIA on site, the rest wounded, missing, or fled. Ambulances and fire rigs reached the perimeter soon after, but everything inside was cinders. Temperatures within the burn zone still topped 750 degrees Fahrenheit, making rescue nearly impossible. Delta 30 fell quiet. No one spoke. On screen, the PD-2 reversed course, slipped out of the target box, and pushed one last frame up to HQ. Tokmak no longer exists.
At 4:50, October 19, 2025, 7 Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels closed in on an inviolable coastal base near Sevastopol, Crimea. Inside, over 1,000 Cuban mercenaries and a string of senior Russian officers massing, not for a parade, not to greet Putin, but to plan a desperate counterstroke, Moscow's last-ditch effort to salvage a collapsing front. Reuters reports, Cuba is actively supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with roughly 1,000 to 5,000 Cuban troops fighting alongside Russian forces on the Kharkiv-Siversk front. As Moscow's combat power bleeds out day by day, each Cuban unit is a last drop of blood fed into a dying heart. The landing info was passed from U.S. intelligence straight to the Ukrainian military. And right now, 12.5 miles away, a line of black hulls, 18 feet long, slices the dark sea. They are 7 Kiev-built USV Magura V5s, low-profile, stealthy surface drones designed to be hard to pick up on coastal surveillance radar. The Magura pack is closing on a coastal staging base where Allied reinforcements, quietly funneled into the fight by Russia, stand ready to charge Ukrainian positions. The makeshift base is shielded by layered, state-of-the-art defenses, stacked one over another. The Kremlin believes this facility untouchable. Ukraine is about to prove otherwise. At 4:55, 3 miles offshore, the 7 USVS throttle back, almost motionless on the water. The steel hatch in each hull swings open, and one by one, 5 UAVs launch from each boat. A total of 35 kamikaze UAVs, 8-inch steel frames, quad-prop motors, and a 7,000 mAh battery pack, manufactured in Kiev one day prior. The lead Magura hoists the sensor, an IR electro-optical module with AI, yawing gently, locking the target. The field barracks are in the gun sight, nowhere to run. All 35 loitering munitions receive the mothership's signal. They spool up and sprint at 75 miles per hour toward the shoreline. The plan is brutal in its simplicity. Not a straight suicide dive, but a very low approach, constantly changing angles to evade radar. Then a single, murderous run into the field barracks. The 5 lead UAVs, unarmed, execute a move no one expects. Each sprays 25,000 strips of aluminum shrapnel, 0.01 meters wide. 125,000 fragments form a screening curtain trailing hundreds of meters along the flight path, big enough to blanket and blind the radar for the 30 real attack UAVs flying at just 32 feet altitude. It becomes a nightmare for the Pantsir S-1. The Russian short-range engagement radar catches the UAV swarm for exactly 2 seconds. Then the screen floods white, tracks jump and scramble, then go dark. The battery is blinded by an artificial dust cloud of metal. The crew fights to keep a track. The Pantsir opens up. 357 E-6E missiles burn off the rails, white streaks ripping the night. The 1RS-2-1 fire control radar thinks it's locked, or at least it believes so. At that instant, the 125,000 aluminum strips begin to play their part. The fire control radar is overwhelmed by reflections. The returns are no longer UAV signatures, but a virtual wall, bright, smeared, and wildly unstable. The scope fills with identical clutter, all returns matching speed and heading. The Pantsir fire computer can no longer tell what's real. The system starts retuning its decoy filtering algorithms. 3 UAVs carrying EW jammers inside the formation switch on. The jamming band precisely matches the control and missile guidance channels. Guidance links flutter and collapse. The problem isn't the missile. The problem is how it's being guided. Pantsir missiles have no active IR seeker, no self-contained radar seeker. They fly because something on the ground walks them. The 1RS-2-1 fire control radar and the associated radio link, the helmet-style guidance feed. In a distorted signal environment, with bands stuffed full of false carriers, the central guidance node can no longer resolve updated target coordinates. The fire control radar loses feedback, the radio link severs. The 1RS-2-1 keeps trying, but a guidance system without an autonomous seeker, when jammed, is just a gun crew shouting into the void. The first missile veers violently, swings an abnormal 656 feet, then detonates in mid-air without contacting anything. The second missile continues on, but no longer receives updates. It locks onto a phantom radar spike reflected by the metallic cloud and then loses the track entirely. The third missile was fired in automatic mode, but the computer latched onto a false track about 260 feet away. It chased a ghost and detonated into cold nothingness. The Pantsir's control loop is pushed to processing limits. Approach speed is too high, target count overwhelms real-time classification, and the whole scope flips into overload. 3 missiles, 3 misses, not a single kamikaze UAV brought down. Pantsir still has the 30mm guns, but the engagement window has shrunk to seconds. In the chaos, the pack punches through the kill zone, nothing left to stop them. A few kilometers away, a Russian early warning post reports nothing abnormal. No UAVs, no acoustic signatures, no clear radar blips. Only a few missile plumes from the Pantsir, then an inexplicable white mid-air detonation. Lookouts tilt their heads up. All they see are ephemeral flashes of light exploding in the sky. No tangible targets appear. They convince themselves it was a successful intercept. They are wrong. What Pantsir just shot down was bait. The missiles were duped. The real targets have yet to reveal themselves. Everything they just saw was only a simulated demonstration. The real war had not begun. At just 32 feet above the sea, the real kamikaze UAV swarm lay hidden. They did not rush. They waited for the moment. On the defensive radar screen near the billets, nothing. No contacts, no warnings. Then, suddenly, a shout from Watch Post 3. Strange thermal signature at 295 feet, speed 75 miles per hour, bearing southeast. The IR camera on the roof had picked up a cluster of thermal returns rushing in. Nobody had time to make sense of it. The heat plume moved like a trail of burning ants, bowing into an arc and accelerating frame by frame. Before the lieutenant on duty could react, the glass exploded inward, and a gust of wind brought the high-pitched scream of mini-engines. The kamikaze UAVs appeared. Too low, too fast, too close. Each had pre-locked a target, no guidance, no feedback. Each carried an HE warhead, precisely 11 pounds of explosive, and hundreds of fragmentation pieces, ready to punch through flesh and structure. The Pantsir S-1 battery finally understood the picture. The radar was blind. The missiles were expended. Only the twin 2 A38M 30mm autocannons remained, the last living guns on the system. gun switched to manual, traverse limited, rounds spraying into empty air like a desperate grab at anything that might stop the strike. Shells tore the air, but hit nothing. The swarm split. They did not all hit the same point. They divided into two attack axes, each group slamming a separate billet in the compound. One element approached from the east flank, driving into the meeting hall roof where Cuban mercs and Russian officers were conducting an internal briefing. The second element swung around to the rear, striking the command sleeping quarters and the troops, lights still on. The first wave, 20 aircraft, did not faint. They sprinted at top speed, hugging the ground, maintaining a crescent formation. 20 streams of fire punched through the roof, shearing composite ceilings and insulation walls like paper. Then, everything was consumed by a double blast, part from the UAV warheads, part from fuel, gas, and stored munitions igniting in a chain. Blast overpressure exceeded 3 bar, enough to strip 3 rows of temporary steel frame huts clean. High-altitude recon UAV footage recorded a red-orange fireball, blooming like a shockwave, throwing objects outward more than 65 feet. A vertical smoke pillar, taller than 195 feet, rose as if a tactical bomb had detonated on site. The entire billet complex disintegrated. Inside, hundreds of Cuban mercenaries and at least 8 Russian officers had no time to escape. None survived. Bodies were blown apart, spines shattered, skulls fragmented, or worse, unidentifiable. The second cluster, the remaining 10, cut the flank and hit the engineering quarter at the rear, power plant and ground communications vehicles. Precision was unnecessary. A hit to exposed equipment would do. That cluster detonated 4 seconds later, knocking out the western power grid, severing signal and destroying C2 links. Alarm calls from the coordination center ceased. Radars stopped turning. The entire compound went dark, crippled. Subsequent satellite analysis estimated the billet zone wiped out with an annihilation radius of 130 feet. No metallic piece left intact. Black smoke jutted skyward like a death banner. The ground still trembled from aftershocks. The air tasted of burning fuel and hot metal. Forward rescue teams, 2 armored ambulances carrying combat medics and an EOD squad, approached the perimeter. They did not advance immediately. Every step was measured by sight and instinct. A high-cover recon drone streamed thermal imagery to the forward command. The FLIR painted bright red patches, hot points still burning. Air support arrived. 2 medvac helicopters flew low, one to lift critically wounded directly to a field hospital in the city, the other carrying a surgical team, supplies, and a refrigerated container for bodies. Chaos with order. A Russian officer lay gasping, losing blood. Groups of Cuban troops convulsed from thermal shock and smoke inhalation. A few were trapped under rubble. The brutal fact, not everyone could be saved. The dead were covered, logged, and a temporary morgue set up away from the aid tents. The Russian Defense Ministry convened an emergency meeting. No video, no public satellite images, only a terse press line. Russian air defenses intercepted a UAS attack, minor damage reported. Inside the Kremlin, the truth was different. Over half the reinforcement Cuban contingent was dead, others critically wounded, senior officers reduced to burned corpses. The forward camp was erased from the map, irrecoverable for at least 6 months. Russian diplomacy faltered. The Cuban government issued no statement, but intelligence sources reported at least 3 transport aircraft rushed bodies back to Havana. No flags, no insignia, no names. When the nameless coffins returned to Havana in silence, no funeral fanfare, no media, no national emblem draped, the deaths of over 1,000 Cuban troops on Russian soil became more than a military tragedy. It became a slap to Havana's foreign policy, the terrible cost of unconditional dependence on Moscow. Each anonymous body repatriated testified to a painful truth. Cuba had gambled its people's blood and lost. On the geopolitical board, Havana now faced not only U.S. sanctions, but international condemnation for aiding an aggressive war. And in the Ukrainian campaign HQ, hundreds of kilometers away, deep underground under an armored operations center, the tech team sat before dozens of screens. No cheers, no applause, only short nods. Final data were encrypted and archived. The display read, 0% own losses, 100% targets destroyed.
At 2:15 on October 19, 2025, over the Russian logistics rail line in the Belgorod region at 5,900 feet, a Ukrainian SBU reconnaissance UAV PD-2 watched silently. Beneath its belly, the USG-405I glowed as it caught every movement. No radar, no radio signal, only the infrared eye sweeping in steady beats. About 2.5 miles away, the silhouette of a TEM-2 diesel locomotive pulling a North Korean resupply consignment gradually emerged. The infrared camera rotated, zoomed 14 times, and peered through each wagon, picking up anomalous signatures. The thermal image came through sharp. A train nearly 2,300 feet long was creeping round a curve. Inside, clear temperature differences marked individual cars. Not diesel or fuel. Inside lay a transfer contract in metal form. 122 millimeters to 152 millimeters artillery rounds, rifle ammo, RPGs. A few T-62M tanks and multiple M1989 170 millimeter self-propelled guns were also aboard. A consignment worth $50 million, moving over 1,000 tons of reinforcement from Pyongyang straight to the western Russian battlefield. From a field command post on the northern outskirts of Kharkiv, the technical crew Dagger 8 immediately marked the target. The resupply column was in sight. The campaign commander issued a single, cold, decisive order. 30 kamikaze UAVs were launched immediately. They left ground rails along the base. Coordinates were uplinked to them via Starlink. The strike package combined UJ-22 attack UAVs and kamikaze platforms converted from DJI Mavic frames and 10-inch steel frames. They split into 3 groups, spaced exactly 980 feet apart. Under the black Belgorod sky, the 30-strong swarm closed on the target silently. No screaming motors, no transmissions, invisible on the maps. Each drone hugged the terrain at 100 feet altitude, following Earth curvature to keep beneath radar coverage. Cruise speed was 93 miles per hour. Only when the formation reached about 15 miles out did Russian defenses register odd contacts. A 96 L6E early warning radar, approximately 26 miles distant, scanned the northwest sector in 5-second sweeps on the S-band. Nothing suspicious showed up. The swarm approached the outer edge of overlapping radar coverage. If they had flown 10 meters higher, they would have sat squarely in the scan cone. At their present altitude, the radar horizon for Russia was roughly 17 miles, and the drones slid by at 16 miles, under everything. Altitude wasn't the only trick. Each UAV was coated in radar-absorbent material, epoxy plus ferrite plus carbon fiber, reducing RCS below 0.07 square meters. To Russian radar, the swarm looked like a flock of errant birds. SIGINT stations tried to sweep frequencies. Nothing. The drones emitted no GPS, no control signals. They did not navigate by radio. They used inertial INS and digitized terrain maps, adjusting course by barometric sensors and laser altimeters. Absolutely electromagnetically silent. At 2:28, the swarm slipped past the first layer of early warning. No sirens, no missile launches, no battery activated. They flowed like high-speed phantoms, leaving behind a multi-hundred-million-dollar air defense network that had not even noticed their arrival. 11 miles remained. The target was within strike range. The tactical air defense zone, west of Valoiki, Belgorod Oblast, lay ahead. The drones had passed the long-range guard. The second layer of defense came into view. A Tor-M2 battery stood on alert, and a Panzer S-1 unit covered the receiving station. ASA fire control radar with 360-degree coverage linked to the local command center. This air defense tier did not search for targets so much as wait for them to appear. And now the Ukrainian UAVs began to show themselves. At 9 miles out, the Tor-M2's AESA picked up extremely small, unstable reflections, jittering over the terrain noise. The identification computer read, "Unknown contact, possibly large birds, RCS 0.05 square meters, speed less than 100 miles per hour, not enough to authorize firing, not a raise of alert." But the drones did not fly straight at the radar. They split into groups and looped, approaching from west, south, and southeast, dropping to 65 feet and threading between tree lines. They formed fan sets with 60-degree separations, making the radar return appear as rotor-like clutter with no single axis. They did not take the shortest path. They arced, forcing the radar to continuously retune its scan. Panzer S-1 began to spot micro-returns on its displays, but by then the swarm was only 5.2 miles from the battery, inside the reaction lag zone. At 2:32, one TOR-M, two battery-fired 29M 331 missiles. One UAV was locked. But 4 seconds later, it suddenly plunged to 19 feet, skimming the ground, its navigation blinded, flying purely on INS. The missile missed and detonated harmlessly mid-air. Two other drones split outward, holding an inverted triangular formation, forcing the AESA to choose among 3 tracks while having only one fire channel available. At 2:33, the swarm penetrated the first interception layer. 5 drones were hit by TOR and ZU-23 close-in gunfire. Some were shrapnel torn, others self-detonated before reaching the aim point. But most pierced through into the too-late intercept zone. Russian air defenses began to comprehend. This was no ordinary swarm raid. These drones did not merely fly low. They deployed tactics, dispersion, obscuring turns, deliberate radar deception, and a capability for radar evasion. They were not just UAVs. They were an educated kamikaze formation. Ahead lay the train carrying 1,000 tons of North Korean material, crawling along a curve beside the Takaya-Sosna River. At 2:35, the kamikaze formation had broken 2 layers of air defense. Now, before them, the resupply train crept around the curve, speed below 25 miles per hour. 41 freight cars. On the PD-2's infrared feed, heat spots delineated a complete loadout. Artillery rounds, rockets, T-62M tanks, self-propelled guns, small arms, RPGs. The swarm kept speed and altitude at 82 feet in an inverted triangular lattice, with each drone separated by exactly 164 feet, ready to plunge into pre-marked target cars. But then an unexpected event occurred. Carriage number 20, amid the train, began transmitting strong electronic emissions, frequency hopping wildly across UHF and VHF. Starlink guidance links glitched instantly. Some UAVs showed GNSS lock lost, switching to INS. Carriage 20 was an EW module, a mobile jamming unit mounting an R330 ZTEL system, concealed under a tarpaulin. Inside, directional antennas and deliberate high-power emissions projected a fan-shaped jamming field with approximately 0.7 miles radius. Immediately, central drones lost GPS altogether. It seemed an ideal trap to make UAVs fall, stray, or self-detonate. But they did not fall, stray, or stop. Every UAV had been programmed with an independent INS navigation system and waypoints preloaded from a digitized terrain map. When GPS vanished, failover algorithms engaged. INS, combined with accelerometers and barometric altimeters, controlled flight. All approach vectors, velocities, and impact angles had been baked into hardened memory. They needed no signals, no remote commands. They needed only distance, bearing, and a ready warhead to detonate when they encountered hot metal. At 2:36, while Russian radars flailed and the EW module sprayed interference, 25 UAVs advanced through the jammer's cutting edge with no loss of altitude or heading, threading through the noise like needles through cloth. No shudder, no dispersion, no crashes. Below 0.7 miles, the infrared sensors on the drones picked up heat tracks, target lock. Interface displayed, target locked, 12 seconds to impact. The swarm closed, and nothing could reach them in time. At 2:37, Strike Group 1, attack on the train's core. Swarm simultaneously dove, low and fast, into 3 priority cars. A UJ-22 with an armor-piercing warhead drove through the corrugated roof of car number 6. Beneath lay over 2,152mm rounds stacked on pallets. Half a second later, the penetrator detonated inside, tearing the car open. Dozens of primers ignited in a chain reaction. Steel splinters flew over 328 feet, slamming into cars 7 and 8 and spreading secondary detonations. Attack Cluster 2, hitting the armored echelon. A custom FPV UAV built on a 10-inch steel frame carrying an OG-7V warhead struck flatbed number 9, where a tarpaulin covered a M1989 self-propelled gun supplied by North Korea. The impact ignited the warm engine compartment. Auxiliary fuel tanks detonated, pitching the gun off its mounts and crushing the rail wheels and the head of car number 10. The gun lay askew across the track, blocking the entire line. The third blow, the largest blast, hit a storage of more than 2,000 BM-21 Grad rockets, 122mm warheads, densely packed like a honeycomb. No penetration was needed, only fire. The strike triggered an immediate chain reaction. A thunderous detonation ripped through 6 consecutive cars. A fireball burst skyward, torching the track and the sky above. Black smoke, thick as ink, rolled upwind and blanketed the forested watch station. A propagation effect followed. T-62M tanks ignited. Near the tail, flatbed number 18 carried a T-62M not yet bunkered of fuel, but loaded with 115mm ammunition. Heat from the adjacent blast baked the stored rounds. An ammo compartment vented. Not a full detonation, but the vehicle burst into intense flames. The blue-yellow burn of propellant fire licked armor plates. Within 10 seconds, the entire logistics block, worth over $50 million, became ash. The Veluiki-Belgorod rail link would be severed for at least 24 hours. The track bed was wrecked, twisted rails, popped sleepers, impossible for traffic. The Veluiki-Kantemirovka corridor was completely cut. Repairs would be impossible within 72 hours. At 4:12, the eastern stretch of line near Veluiki still burned. Columns of black smoke hundreds of meters high turned to ashen gray, the plume drifting across forest and smothering rear defensive positions. Military firefighting units were rushed from the Belgorod supply depot. They arrived 35 minutes after the final blast. En route, foam trucks halted because pavement surface temperatures exceeded 575 degrees Fahrenheit. Metal flowed in rivulets. Rails glowed and buckled like paper clips. They could not extinguish the inferno, only watch. T-62 hulls smoldered. Oil smoke clung to the ground. No casualty report. No one alive remained in the destroyed wagons. Nobody could stop the heat or the chain reactions. The 1,000-ton train, worth over $50 million, died on the spot. Russia and North Korea responded with an unusual silence. Pyongyang issued no statement. No investigation demanded. Only a confidential bulletin to Kongye Military District, supply run number. 9 lost contact at handover point. Suspend further convoys via Rajin Vladivostok. At Kharkiv, Dagger 8 extinguished their command link after the final UAV transmission. All data was archived in secure storage. No press conferences, no propaganda video. A single cold order was sent into the campaign system before the session was purged. Eastern supply corridor neutralized. Shift priority to radar targets. Smoke had not yet cleared. The rail line was unrepaired. The front line stood still. But one thing had changed forever. No train from North Korea to Russia would risk night transits again. And no Russian air defense crew would trust that their radars would warn them in time next time. The PD-2 sent the final message back to Kharkiv. Target destroyed. Column neutralized. Secondary explosions continuing. Fire spreading. 0 movement. 0 survivors on deck. Mission completed. At exactly 9:15, September 30th, 2025, over the skies of Donetsk, a Ukrainian Vector reconnaissance drone was tracking every residual heat signature left by an artillery barrage just minutes earlier. From 4,260 feet, the Raptor 360 infrared camera suite drew a tactical map that pinpointed each gun barrel in the Russian formation. Immediately, 25 Ukrainian combat UAVs dispersed around the area, simultaneously changed course, closing on the emitting positions, slipping into the blind seams of the 9 S-36 and 91 N6E radar network. They were setting up for a bold strike right in the middle of the Donetsk battle space. The automatic targeting system swept fast and tagged the precise locations of 11 M1989 Koksin self-propelled guns, North Korean pieces supplied to Russia, arrayed along the outer arc of the formation. With a single command transmitted, 5 decoy UAVs sheared off, spooled engines to maximum output, and drove straight at the North Korean gun crews. The decoys, 10-inch quad-frame drones, carried repeater jamming modules and drew every radar eye in the sector with oversized composite skins, chassis panels, and ungainly fairings. As they punched into enemy coverage, Russia's 9S-18 radar picked up anomalous mid-range contacts. The North Korean Koksan slewed 45 degrees toward the 5 strange returns. Russian fire control reacted with immediate HE salvos from the 170mm guns fired high at the sky. Fireballs blossomed, sparks and fragments rained into the tree line. Russian and North Korean crews called all clear, depressed the M1989 barrels, and began reloading. They had no idea what they had just destroyed was only the prelude. Exactly 6.2 miles behind, a 20-ship strike package kept ghosting forward, silent, discreet, never once flaring on the warning scopes. In a civilian-looking ops truck on the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia, Team Nemesis of the 412th UAV Regiment watched every pixel from the drone feeds. Across the line, Russian crews were heads down, both depressing barrels and ramming rounds. That exact reload window, the gap in fire, was the open gate to hell for the real strike closing in. At 9:20, the 20 primary attack vectors were now just 2.5 miles from target, yet utterly invisible in a noisy sky. They flattened at 490 feet, held 68 miles per hour, and drove straight through the radar void the decoys had gouged only minutes earlier. The formation slid on in total EM silence. No emissions, no radio ripple for interception. Everything rode on INS inertial guidance, continuously trimmed by GNSS packets uplinked via Starlink every 15 seconds. Cold, precise synchronization. Targets were hard-locked. 11 Koksin M1989 spaced along the outer ring with Kamaz ammo carriers jammed in between. Their coordinates had been recorded to the centimeter just minutes before. Every UAV flew the route exactly as planned. No deviation. 20 suicide airframes sliced through the smoke and fire still billowing from the 5 exploded decoys. Distance to target was now measured in seconds, the last 1.8 miles before the fatal dives. This was the Baba Yaga spearhead. 20 drones Kiev's engineers had hot-rodded from whatever they could pool. Civilian DJI Mavics, hyper-agile racing frames, mid-size quadcopters, even larger Vampire-class airframes. At 9:22, near the target, the swarm ran into a dense EW curtain, Russian jammers screaming at full power, a sea of noise flooding the control links. Control dropped for a few seconds, but Kiev's techs had a contingency baked in. The anti-jamming suite on each frame immediately triggered a response chain, channel swaps, rekeyed crypto, and a failover to inertial dead reckoning. In an instant, the swarm switched modes, off external links and onto onboard nav, plus visual recognition. They frequency hopped with dynamic keys. Hostile noise got fragmented. Simultaneously, the vision stack lit up, comparing live imagery to stored target templates, refixing positions through local matching. Physics shielding did its share. Tight metal shrouds hugged the boards. EMI filters on power lines and harnesses burned off interference, and absorber patches wrapped sensitive nodes. Noise couldn't flip the system wholesale. Through the turbulence, the net settled. EO/IR sensors locked across multiple aim points. CAM-A, Z bed panels, gun mantlets, heat halos around Koksan barrels. The electronic eye flashed, locked. No words, no chatter, only the cold spin of rotors ready to strike. Even if a few drones drifted a degree or two after the jamming wall, the 20 remained inside Nemesis's ruthless control envelope. At 0.6 miles to splash, the formation split, tearing into 4 prongs to cinch the outer ring of the M1989 battery. In the terminal, they dumped the nose, dropping to approximately 230 feet, skin-tracking terrain like wraiths. Speed bumped to 75 miles per hour. Motors howled. On the ops screens, the camera frames shuddered. yet still printed a crisp picture. Putin's gun line stamped with Kim Jong-un's signature. Ahead, 11 Koksan M 1989s, still hot from the previous salvo. Between them, 5 Kamaz trucks stuffed with 170mm rounds, a rolling magazine enough to level a Ukrainian city if fully expended. Around the pits, several North Korean crews worked the guns, guarded by Russian troops. None suspected that the very battery Moscow had burned $105 million to acquire would be a sea of fire in minutes, torched by a cheap, crude swarm from Ukraine's nightmares. At 9:25, attack groups 1 and 2 dove straight into the center while 3 and 4 split to the flanks, closing a death vise. Each FPV kamikaze carried a belly-mounted HE charge with 2 kilograms of TNT, enough to trigger vicious secondaries on penetration and sweep the area with shock. Range: 656 feet. A few North Korean and Russian soldiers finally saw death sprinting in along their flanks. Inside Nemesis, the Ukrainian engineer cut the last safeguard. Terminal dive armed. All drones welded to their assigned coordinates. Groups 1 and 2, 10 flying bombs dropped together. Some punched straight into 170mm Koksan muzzles. Others slammed Kamaz ammo trucks. The first impact rang like a steel anvil. The follow-on detonation was a hammer blow. Overpressure hurled gun carriages, flipped Kamaz cabs. Several Koksans took hits down the throat. Feed mechanisms shredded, sights ripped off, loaders erased in a blink. More FPVs hit the 170mm throats, magazines wrecked, machine gearing crushed, optics and panels burst to shards, loader teams erased from stations. The rest tunneled into Kamaz ammo bays. The first fireball bulged, then chained, the entire bed lit like a sun. Overpressure, about 33 pounds TNT equivalent, drove a flame jet greater than 98 feet high. Black smoke corkscrewed like a vortex. Shock ripped across the perimeter. Instant pressure spikes greater than 0.5 bar rattled the ground, blew frames loose, and popped windscreens out well beyond 656 feet. In 20 seconds, the formation center was a blazing crucible. The M1989 battery could no longer fire. Kamaz resupply rigs were twisted skeletons. The supply line took a beheading cut. Group 3 bored into the left flank like a steel auger. The first contact was not just a blast, but a tearing shriek. Mounts torn free, support legs sheared, sights flung, the electronics bay igniting instantly. Impact stacked like a drum line. Tires shredded, suspensions crushed. Linkages bent out of true. Ancillary kits popped piecemeal. Batteries, air bottles, junction boxes, metal shards hissed through the air. In a blink, the left flank became a dead zone. Guns silent, vehicles broken and strewn. Smoke so dense, visibility collapsed to a few dozen meters. The last attack cluster finished the job with a rake of HE into the remaining forward gun line. It scythed the opposite wing, each contact a sledgehammer, skins ripped, control panels shattered, electrics flared, fasteners sheared, trunnions skewed. Carriages lost level and fell out of firing posture. Fuel tanks and ammo tins lit off, setting off serial secondaries, small blasts chaining a continuous fire band. Smoke thickened. Flame ran along oil streaks and combustibles. Internal comms snarled as fragments and failures killed the net. Flame fronts from all 4 axes merged into a approximately 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit surface blaze. Discrete blasts stitched together, overpressure stacked. Leftover ammo and fuel kicked into full cook-off. The shock rippled across the area. The combined Russian-North Korean gun array collapsed. Koksans fell mute. Resupply trucks burned to frames. What Moscow and Pyongyang had paraded as a symbol of cooperation was now junk. Smoke columns approximately 195 feet over a dead line. The forward battery was neutralized. On satellite, the artillery crescent had vanished. In its place, a drawn-out scar of red flame and black columns punching straight up. Guns that once formed an arc were now twisted metal, interleaved with crater mouths, a wall of fire visible even to commercial birds overhead. Bodies lay scattered among blackened frames and shard fields. Emergency squawks screamed continuously. Broken, gasping pleas crackled out of forward radios. Audio stuttering, drowned by the pop and thump of a magazine still cooking off. The first fire and rescue teams pushed for the site, but the grid had become a fire sea. Heat was too high. Leftover rounds kept detonating in bursts, blocking all approaches. Engines had to halt at range. Water cannons couldn't lance through the red wall. Relief was fully stymied. Smoke and chain blasts owned the ground. In the embers, charred UAV frames lay strewn through the wreckage, hard fingerprints of a suicide swarm. Ukraine lost drones, but in exchange, the entire Koksan cluster and its resupply echelon were erased. The strike didn't just delete the forward guns, it triggered cascade effects. The battery line was cut, the ammo pipeline severed. Russia-North Korea's Donetsk fire plan was paralyzed for days. Moscow and Pyongyang went dead silent. No official bulletin, no admission. State media issued foggy lines and smothered the scope of loss. A joint operation dissolved in flame and smoke, and both capitals chose concealment, exactly as they always do when failure stands in the open. The Nemesis camo truck in Zaporizhzhia exfiltrated fast. No beacons, no breadcrumbs. It disappeared completely, leaving behind only the imprint of a cleanly executed operation. The opponent's entire gun position annihilated, and Ukraine's mastery of kamikaze UAV warfare affirmed.
At 0057 on October 5th, 2025, over the city of Kstovo, Nizhny Novgorod Oblast, Russia, a Ukrainian PD-2 reconnaissance UAV had been quietly watching everything for hours. Hanging at 8,200 feet, every activity at Russia's fourth-largest oil refinery, Lukoil Nizhny Novgorod, was caught and catalogued. The USG-405 infrared camera platform slung under the PD-2's nose drew a precise map of the refinery complex, marking the entire lattice of storage tanks, pipelines, access gates, every vulnerable point. It streamed each attack point straight by Starlink satellite to a formation of 90 UAVs flying in, exactly 125 miles away. They had launched from rails strung along Ukraine's northeastern border the night before, each bird leaving the rail every 10 seconds on command. In that formation were 60 decoy UAVs completely rebuilt from commercial drones, refitted DJI Mavics, 10-inch frames using parts ordered on Alibaba, even racing drones and wooden fuselage UAVs joining the mission. From a concealed field command post in northeastern Kharkiv, the Strike Ops Team codename Nemesis 90, 412th Regiment, glued their eyes to the ops screens, tagging every rising heat signature on the tactical map. The targets, the refinery's primary tanks, stood out against the gray background, a 50-degree Fahrenheit temperature delta, a simple but fatal tell. The tanks were full. About 500,000 tons of oil sat inside 10-millimeter thin steel shells. One block of energy, a static bomb waiting. Neutralizing the refinery wasn't a reckless gambit, it had been calculated for weeks. The task group split into two roles. Ghost 1 would deploy decoy UAVs, while Ghost 2 guided the main strike package right behind. An encrypted attack order went out at once. The decoy swarm fanned, approaching from multiple axes and at every altitude. Their swollen steel silhouettes drank in every radar beam from Russia's early warning arrays. At 2:03, at Moscow's Air Defense Command, the long-range 91N6E radar crew panicked as their scopes filled not with an orderly numerical picture, but with a blizzard of unknown returns. The density was so extreme that for the first seconds, they thought the system had glitched. The decoy cloud sealed the sky from all directions and altitudes, building an electronic wall advancing into the radar's coverage. Like an invisible black hole, it swallowed the radar's attention, shielding the real strike, now exactly 12 miles out. Russian reaction wasn't slow. The S-400 battery fired. A salvo of 9 M96 interceptors broke from their tubes, while the 92 N6E engagement radar lit the targets, guiding each interceptor. INS on the interceptor noses locked onto the decoy swarm, rating them the greatest threat with zero suspicion. Seconds later, a string of short detonations boomed. Fireballs blossomed in the sky, swatting down decoys, their 10-inch frames, wooden fuselages, bargain shells tumbling in flames to the ground. But the night wasn't over for Russia. Another cluster blinked in from the western rim of the scope. At the 9S-18M1 radar post, a fresh attack order went out immediately. A Buck M2 battery dug in 9 miles from the refinery spat multiple 9M317 interceptors. The decoy flock fell inside the envelope. The Russian commander smirked as the fire control radar annotated each spinning prop in the air. No one in the Russian chain doubted their picture. They didn't know the real strike package still hid from air defenses worth hundreds of millions. The second interceptor salvo clawed skyward. Seconds later, more kills populated the command log. This was exactly the reaction Kiev's controllers wanted. Every interceptor fired marched Russia deeper into the real kill box. Each hit was a strategic loss. More important, each launch handed Ukrainian intelligence a priceless dataset, precise battery positions, radar bands. Russia mapped its own defenses. Battery commanders drafted and sent triumphant sit-reps to Moscow HQ, unaware they'd just made the worst decision of their careers. As the decoys exploded, the ingress corridor swung open like a lock clicked off. Only then did the true strike appear. Those mindless decoys were dirt cheap compared to the yield Kyiv was about to cash in. Ghost 1 had done its job. Russia had burned 40-plus interceptors and fixated multiple defense nodes. The game was now Ghost 2 versus the refinery. No S-400, no book in the loop, just open space, and the strike drones sliding into it with the cold certainty of a problem already solved. The main spear point rode AN-196 Lyutie Kamikaze UAVs, range greater than 620 miles, each with a 77-pound TNT warhead. Silent death from across the border, as Russians call them. Greater than 2,200 pounds of explosives would be slashing through the short-range layer, the refinery's last real guard. Unlike the noisy decoys, the main package moved in secrecy under total EMCON. Holding a loiter approach, the 30 UAVs cruised 68 miles per hour at 165 feet AGL, hugging Earth's curve under the Russian early warning net. Terrain-following profiles plus minimalist composite skins with few flat facets let them shed radar reflections. To Russian scopes, they were just a flock of big migratory birds, too ambiguous to drive the alert level to max. Inside each shell, GNSS fed the INS and could fall back to autonomous behavior when signals died, basic ECCM. In short, jam GNSS and the drone still fights, like a soldier with the target memorized. At 2:25, 30 miles out, the world suddenly went dark. No GNSS, no satellite link, no direct orders from Ghost 2, only chaos. Ahead of the package, Russian EW stations were at full burn, an invisible wall draped over the sky. X-band rakes shredded anything electronic. One sweep across the formation and Kiev's plan would collapse. But Ghost 2 didn't flinch. This was in the playbook. Within seconds, the UAV operators had stability back. On paper, the EW barrage had killed Ukraine's strike. In practice, Kyiv never steps into a fight without a backstop. Each kamikaze carried an AI visual odometry chip, terrain/target recognition for autonomous mission continuation in GPS-denied space. When GPS vanished, the swarm flipped to INS for course keeping, flicked the EO/IR cameras on for 3 seconds, off again, just enough to sight the field. The package kept absolute silence to avoid radar DF, while AN-196 number. 7 pulsed a strobing peak that forced EW to spread its energy thinner. Now the target was plain. The 30 locked image tracks and drove on INS plus optics alone. No GPS, no uplink. Lukoil Nizhny Novgorod is one of Russia's 4 largest refineries. 16 million tons per year, 46,000 tons per day flowing straight into the fuel bloodstream. Put differently, a year's output could light 70+ million households, the equivalent of 20 Moscows glowing for 12 months. Rows of tanks, from crude to finished product, had been topped off minutes earlier, and a single decisive blow into the tank farm would send 500,000 tons into instant vapor. Not a bomb, not a battery, just millions of tons of fuel vaporizing in the wrong place. The southwest spine of Russia's refining network would seize up at once, 10% of the population facing a brutal choice in the oncoming winter: shiver in the cold, or warm by dry wood and whispered prayers. Crossing the IP, the autopilots locked attack lanes to discrete targets, data refreshed 20 times per minute, coordinates pinned to the centimeter. Engines screamed. The formation surged to 93 miles per hour while splitting into sub-packages. Only now did Russia's short-range defenses sense what was coming. Pulse Doppler sets on Panzer S finally began to tick. Crews jolted as their birds morphed into something moving at impossible speed. The all targets intercepted message announced seconds earlier made operators hesitate. The dual-band 1RS-2-1 sets spun up and 30mm streams were thrown at the swarm. But it was too late. Time had become Pantsir's biggest enemy. 5,000 rounds per minute walls of 30mm fire now only burned Russia's money in a desperate losing intercept. Exactly 2:55. The first 10 AN-196s dived into the crude tank farm, where internal pressure ran highest. The initial blast bloomed. Milliseconds later, the detonation rolled across the complex as the first attack cluster chewed its target with exploding steel jaws. Flames spread faster than any simulation. Gushing oil traced chain-lit fuses, one secondary hammering into the next. The sound no longer warned. It patterned the disaster. Boom, shudder, collapse. Tanks, side by side, under heat and pressure, failed in sequence. Shop roofs tore, gantries crashed, tank shells skipped their pedestals. The fire, a beast, ate everything along its path. The next 10 hit the intermediate processing and distribution pump blocks, where the pipe network and mechanicals concentrate. Overpressure from the first strike crazed concrete, snapped runs, and turned pipe fractures into fire fountains. 2 unmanned aerial vehicles speared the main trunk line. The remainder tore into distillation towers and manifold banks. In under 3 minutes, the complex's circulatory system was severed. Fire chased along steel runs, sketching an incandescent gash kilometers long. From afar, a scythe of flame across the plant. The final 10 approached the finished product tank farm, holding greater than 500,000 tons of refined fuel. They held low, then pitched over together. In a breath, 5 tanks detonated in series, throwing a shock comparable to hundreds of tons of industrial explosive. Heat and pressure punched air outward. Shock waves marched for dozens of kilometers. Remaining tanks reached their limits, then one by one ruptured. Blasts propagated like a heartbeat from a dying leviathan. Fire drowned the entire complex, hundreds of meters tall, mirrored in the Volga. Satellite thermal sensors captured a luminous smear greater than 7 miles wide, the signature of a regional-scale industrial eruption. Internal fire systems collapsed, power failed, comms stuttered and died. From monitoring posts hundreds of kilometers away, the blaze showed as a red continent on the national energy map, a hot spot in the purest sense. Local fire brigades charged in, but met an enemy water and foam wouldn't quickly tame. Pump stations were down, power feeds cut, several approach lanes had burned out, making entry both dangerous and slow. Response teams tried to ring-fence the fire, shielding residential quarters and blocking spread to other volatile stores, but the scale had blown past normal response capacity. At command level, damage reports ticked up by the minute. Infrastructure losses, production collapse, risk to strategic stocks. Political decisions followed. Emergency notices, selective evacuations, spinning up alternate fuel distribution nodes. Yet immediate scarcity began to bite. Local fuel prices spiked, factories and transport throttled back. The logistics lattice bowed under massive strain. One of Russia's 4 flagship oil and fuel works lay prostrate, despite Moscow's efforts to smother the truth. Nemesis 90 packed the gear, left the covert bunker, and disappeared into silence. Mission completed.
At 1750 on October 10th, 2025, a Farada operator's eyes were glued to his FPV goggles as the command he had waited hours for finally arrived. In just minutes, 2 concealed USV Katran would begin their mission to obliterate one of Russia's most important offshore platforms in the Temryuk Gulf. The objective: cripple the Black Sea coastal energy axis and tilt control of the sea in Kiev's favor. From 8,200 feet, a reconnaissance UAV Leleka 100 had been silently watching for hours like a ghost. The PLCI-Z-30 camera pod under its belly peeled back every detail of the Temryuksko platform and streamed encrypted imagery straight to the Katrans. It kept station inside radar blind spots, resiliently operating inside jamming zones and sending real-time frames of the platform back to the command, where death was being scripted. At a hidden bunker 310 miles from the target, Snake Island, Ukraine, Farada, 2 technicians in Ukraine's intelligence directorate coordinated with the Russian Free Corps, eyes fixed on every pixel arriving on their screens. This operation bore not only Kiev's imprint, it was a declaration from Russian anti-war fighters. They would directly operate and launch the attacking USVS, a knife from within to pierce the Kremlin's outer defenses. The timing was chosen with surgical precision, precisely during the platform crew's watch change and coffee break. A few minutes of laxity between shifts enough to open a lethal gap where every slip is paid in blood and fire. The attack order was sent at once. Target coordinates were loaded into both USV Katran navigation systems, the platform's power generation units, the supply that ran the whole rig. But the target list included a particularly dangerous item, the Neva B military radar complex. This was not a commercial radar. Neva B operates in the Ka band, provides maritime surveillance out to approximately 32 miles, and is the Navy's eye in the area. As long as it stood, the Black Sea was Moscow's backyard. If its sight was blinded, Kiev would regain battlefield initiative. Tonight, that would happen. The 2 USVs were crewed by technicians from the Russian Free Corps and Farada, the cutting edge of asymmetric techno-warfare. Each carried 4 modified kamikaze UAVs, 13-inch carbon frames derived from high-speed racing drones, structurally beefed up for higher MTOW, and a 4mm carbon load-bearing fuselage, designed to slam into steel, punch through radio interference, and strike the weakest links in Russia's naval defense chain. At 1803, the twin USV Katrans pushed deep into the coastal waters off the Taman Peninsula. On the military control screen, a strong jamming signature suddenly appeared. Russia's electronic warfare systems had activated full defenses. From an R-330ZHEW vehicle stationed on the Temryuk shore, an active jamming field was unleashed at maximum intensity, creating an invisible electronic wall. Any drone entering it would die in an instant. But surprise came from both sides. As the Katrans crossed into the jamming envelope, their command link dropped out entirely for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds, enough to sort who was real weapon and who was just a radio toy. Immediately, emergency navigation mode engaged. Onboard INS took over, fused with deck sensor data to continuously estimate position and heading without GPS or external guidance. Each Katran carries an AI visual odometry chip programmed to recognize terrain and target architecture and to continue pursuit of the platform inside a GPS-denied zone, the very area Russia assumed was its safe sanctum. At higher levels, sensor fusion routines never paused. Image processing, radar returns, and the floating rig's structural model were cross-checked and refined so the system maintained an accurate 3D fix on Temryuksko. All telemetry, images, wind and current data, reflectivity cues, streamed back to the command via secure relay channels, looping around the jamming field and beyond Russian control. Katran did not need a command link to complete the mission. It was trained to continue, even if humans fell out of the control loop, now fully in autonomous mode. The two USVs rode the waves at 75 miles per hour each, skimming the sea in silence. Ahead, the target lay in the corridor, nothing more to hide behind. Temryuksko, seated close off the Taman Peninsula in Krasnodar, is one of Moscow's strategic Black Sea strongpoints. It's not only extraction infrastructure, but a node processing greater than 500,000 tons of oil per year. Fuel that flows straight into the dwindling logistical veins of the Russian war effort. A single strike could cut output and force Moscow to either suspend offshore operations and pull back to shore, or stubbornly hold and become an inviting target for further Ukrainian intelligence-led raids. But this was only the surface. Deep inside the platform, the Russians had installed a multi-layer military radar system, Neva-B. Towers of antennas sweeping continuous arcs and covering the entire Gulf and its strategic approaches. Neva-B detects almost every Ukrainian maritime action and is a thorn in Kiev's side. Nestled deep inside Russian-held waters and protected by layers of costly defensive systems, Moscow felt absolute confidence in the platform's security. For Ukraine, nowhere is untouchable, and this time they did not act alone. Behind the operation stood the Russian Free Corps, Russians willing to sever ties with Moscow's brutality. Kiev wanted to prove modern war is not about fleets so much as hitting the right target at the right time with a mechanism that can punch through any line. At 1810, the mothership Katrans reached the UAV launch points with no warning. Nose hatches opened to reveal the launching arrays. With a scream, the high-power brushless motors spun up, and the kamikazes shot skyward from the hulls like living bullets at 75 miles per hour. Each drone was a minimal war machine with high lethality. Powered by 6S LiPo packs greater than 10,000 milliamp hours, matched to 50 to 80 amp hour ESCs and 7-inch composite props, they could loiter and fight for 8 to 12 minutes even inside high-power EW. Attack data was pre-programmed into the central guidance chips. At launch, 8 UAVs divided into 2 groups. Package 1, fan formation, locking onto the Neva-B radar cluster. Package 2, low-profile approach hugging the sea surface toward the platform's central power plant, where a approximately 20-kilogram TNT blow would send the whole complex into inferno. Less than 10 seconds after lift, familiar nightmares struck. Video feeds began to garble. Twisting interference lines appeared on control screens. Then the imagery froze. Control was lost for 0.6 seconds. Who was behind it? No question. R-934BMV, Russia's heavyweight EW, had locked the control band and reflected jamming back, saturating the link between pilot and UAV. If these were ordinary FPV toys, the mission would have failed, but these were heavy-duty combat FPV platforms. At link loss, they switched to semi-autonomous mode. Dual IMUs and inertial sensors took over trajectory. In the 3 seconds of blackout, the UAVs held 13 feet altitude, maintained speed, and recalculated attack trajectories from stored target coordinates. At approximately 1 mile out, the Cadex Polar FPV camera unexpectedly recovered. On the controller screen, the rig stood out as if in daylight. Structure lines, piping, radar mast, all visible. The Neva-B radar glowed with thermal signature. IR matched previous intel. Lock commands were issued. At approximately 0.6 miles, a 360-degree scrum half-early warning radar finally kicked in, already too late for an accurate defense. 9 M331 interceptors from a Tor M2 battery roughly 10 kilometers away launched, an instinctive reflex. Salvos of 8 missiles trailed along radar guidance beams toward the swarm. But the reflex came too late. At 1,600 feet, the FPV strike craft entered terminal mode. Their analog digital video links, connected via fiber optic tether on the launch platform delivery, recorded every inch of the rig as they closed. Each frame read like a death warrant. Russian sailors started running, dropping weapons to form chaos. Some cowered behind steel, personal arms meaningless. Shouts and shouted orders overlapped into an uncontrollable tangle. Up ahead, no mercy. Each drone carried a shaped HEI penetrator incendiary warhead weighing 11 pounds, engineered to punch ship skin and detonate inside to set the rig ablaze. When they detonated, effective lethal radius exceeded 165 feet. Pressure, fire, and thousands of alloy fragments would strip bare any non-specialized armor, including people. No siren could stop them. No intercept would reach in time. The decision was programmed. Death advanced at 75 miles per hour. Exactly 18:15. Drone 1 hit the right array on the radar mast. The blast rocked the entire platform. The antenna section sheared from its mount. Flames licked out, burning signal cabling. Fire cascaded instantly toward power compartments. Drone 2 dove from a higher angle into the control cabin beneath the radar, where signal processors and auxiliary power units were housed. A flash and the second explosion tore the engineering deck apart. Shrapnel flew in all directions, tossing rescuers aside. Drones 3 and 4 struck remaining support nodes, one into the stable voltage cluster, the other into the container housing radar wave-shaping equipment. 2 more blasts detonated, ripping the radar center in pieces and raising a plume of flames over 100 feet. Black smoke rolled over the platform and the waters around it. The entire Neva B suite was neutralized in less than 10 seconds. No more emissions, no more surveillance, no more protection sweep for the Western Black Sea. While the Neva B mast burned like a towering torch, the second kamikaze package hit another critical objective, the platform's central power plant. This was the mechanical heart, diesel prime movers, voltage stabilization systems, breaker panels, control racks, and distribution lines for the entire complex. UAV-5 came in first. It skimmed the deck, past the distribution station, and punched straight into the main ventilation shaft of a generator. The initial blast forced high-pressure gas through internal ducts, blowing away armored cladding. UAV-6 followed, slamming into a bank of transfer panels, dozens of high-voltage breakers, and digital controllers. The second explosion induced a catastrophic electromagnetic and fire cascade through the electrical network, reddening the distribution rooms before flame took hold. UAV-7 attacked low, detonating in a technical vault beneath the deck where high-tension cables ran along structural members. That blast not only severed cabling, but snapped part of the rig's support frames, creating mechanical shock that rippled into adjacent areas. UAV-8 delivered the coup de grace. Not at equipment, but at auxiliary fuel storage. 4 diesel tanks used to feed the generators. It pierced a tank wall and detonated. The resulting conflagration produced a fireball nearly 130 feet tall and consumed the power plant. At 18:18, at the attack command post on Snake Island, the main screen burned with red. Surveillance feeds were archived and replayed frame by frame in high resolution. Neva B was blown apart. The control cabin was scorched down to the frame. The power plant sagged at an angle. Steel walkways tilted. Fuel tanks detonated. Everything streamed back in real time. No cheering, no loud talk. Only telemetry readouts. Platform radar temperature 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Continuous sparking for 36 seconds after the fourth blast. Neva B radar. Total loss of emissions. Power grid. No signal. Jamming field, silent, and the Temryaksko complex, offline. From this moment on, no offshore platform near Crimea would be automatically safe. No radar would be considered invulnerable. No patch of sea would remain unobjectionably Russia's backyard.
Mission completed.
Exactly 00:15 a.m., October 8, 2025. The Special Operations Unit Dagger 8, part of Ukraine's Security Service, SBU, received a direct launch order from High Command in Kyiv. The encrypted message reached a concealed field bunker buried beneath the beaches of Zatoka. Immediately, 8 Magura 5 unmanned surface vessels were launched from coastal rail-guided platforms, beginning a silent strike operation before a single Russian radar had even realized their existence. Skimming just above the waves at a cruising speed of 50 miles per hour, they headed straight for a target over 310 miles away, the Podlet K-1 surveillance radar array and the Nebo-M system overseeing the eastern sector of the Black Sea. At that very moment, a PD-2 reconnaissance UAV had been hovering for hours over the Tuzla Bay area. From an altitude of 7,550 feet, its USG-405 sensor suite rendered a 3D map of every Russian long-range radar node in the region. On that digital battlefield, strike coordinates were clearly marked, then uplinked directly to the 8 daggers surging in from the west via Starlink satellites orbiting at 12,400 miles above Earth. At 2:55 a.m., roughly 186 miles from the target zone, the 8 Magura 5.5s surfaced one by one, slicing through the night. Each vessel measured 19 feet in length, coated in radar-absorbing composite paint, and designed with ultra-flat hulls to minimize radar cross-section, RCS. They accelerated to 53 miles per hour, fast enough to stay on schedule, slow enough to blend into sea clutter. This wasn't a suicide mission. It was a precision operation scripted by SBU weeks in advance. 3 main phases: depart launch site, close on target, destroy. But before the explosions, every phase demanded absolute precision. A master plan and dozens of backup contingencies had been programmed into the strike package, steering all 8 USVs straight toward the radar cluster Russia had once deemed untouchable. At a coastal outpost in Crimea, the 91 N6E Big Bird radar, part of the S-400 air defense system, continued its 12-second sweep cycle. The control station showed nothing unusual. The sea appeared empty. But what they didn't know, the Magura 5.5s were wave-hugging at just 1.5 feet above sea level, with a radar signature smaller than 0.05 square meters. The cold sea surface scrambled the long-range radar beams, and the USVS's return signals dissolved into background clutter. The 8 Magura 5.5s quietly fanned into an arched formation, spaced precisely 2,460 feet apart, temporarily slipping through the edge of the S-400's coverage bubble. No radio emissions, no comms, no GPS. The 4-cylinder Rotax 914 engines ran just above idle, not silent, but nearly indistinguishable from wave noise. The vessels relied entirely on inertial navigation systems, INS, drifting ghosts across the dark water. At 5:33 a.m., at a distance of 43 miles from the target, a Buk M2 radar cluster began sweeping. Nested along the shoreline of Russia's Taman Peninsula, the 9S-36 fire control radar of the Buk M2 entered its 4th scan cycle. The operator's screen showed a 6-second delay, but no anomalies. Clear skies, quiet sea, or so the exhausted Russian crew believed. The Buk unit remained at alert level 2, not yet in combat mode. The 8 Magura units had been configured for a special role, to bait and disrupt the Buk network. They simultaneously decelerated to just 6.2 miles per hour. Deck hatches opened, mechanical launchers rose, and paired decoy UAVs were deployed. These were lightweight 5-inch frame drones with dummy warheads and electronic spoofers. They were programmed to fly just 13 feet above water, shift transmission frequencies every 6 seconds, cut all signals immediately once radar lock was detected. At 5:39 a.m., 20 decoy UAVs launched in unison, forming smaller swarms, darting in multiple directions and veering toward the Buk cluster. On the 9S-36 radar screen, 20 targets appeared suddenly, all moving at an average speed of 47 miles per hour, heading from open water straight into Level 1 threat range. The abrupt appearance of dozens of contacts overwhelmed the radar interface, triggering nonstop alerts in the command cabin. The Buk M2 battery automatically escalated to Alert Level 1. 8-9 M317ME interceptors were instantly armed. The system switched to semi-active homing mode, guided by the 9 S-36 fire control radar. In less than a second, 8 missiles erupted from their launch tubes, streaking into the foggy night sky, leaving bright white contrails. The decoys were struck at approximately 6.8 miles, exploding with minimal force, just as designed. The remaining drones cut their signals the moment lock-on was detected. The missiles lost track, spiraled aimlessly, and self-destructed in the upper flight layer. Inside the control cabin, the 9 S-36 radar began flickering. It attempted to reacquire target trajectories but failed to distinguish between real and false echoes. For the next 22 seconds, no valid targets were updated. Exploiting that brief moment of confusion, 3 Magura units maintained parallel vectors, skimming past the left flank of the radar site, threading through a corridor where the Buk's sensors had been dazzled, and the S-400's low-altitude vision was already blind. No RF signals, no UAV control links. The 3 USVs glided silently over the sea, leaving no visible wake, no light reflections, and no distinguishable mechanical footprint. At 5:45 a.m., the Buk system was still struggling to reacquire valid targets, but the processor continued tracking over 20 phantom echoes. No one noticed that 3 real objects were skimming just above the waves from the southeast. The 3 Magura craft had cleared the Buk's engagement zone. Each cylinder of their engines roared at full throttle, accelerating them back to formation speed less than 10 miles from Tuzla Island. The result, a storm of interceptor missiles detonated in vain. Every nearby air defense unit's attention was diverted. The entire mid-range defense layer had been fooled, misfired, and dropped into a temporary observation state. The radar duty log from the Russian operators later read, "System engaged. No real intrusion detected." But 3 Black Phantoms of modern warfare were already crawling toward the defensive heart of Tuzla Island, and waiting for them was the Pantsir. At 5:51 a.m., at 7.7 miles from Tuzla, a mild electromagnetic pulse rippled across the composite hulls of the Magura 55s. The GNSS navigation feed flickered out. Data channels glitched. All communication with the onboard drones was severed for exactly 2 seconds. The strike group had entered the active jamming zone, a 9.3 miles radius controlled by Russian electronic warfare units. Hidden in a forest north of Tuzla, an R330ZH Zhetel jammer blasted interference across UHF/VHF and GNSS bands, blocking all GPS and GLONASS signals from NATO constellations. Less than 6.2 miles away, a Krasuka 4 complex ran in bloom jamming mode, blanketing the Crimean coastline in thick electronic fog. As soon as the electromagnetic sensors detected waveform distortion beyond threshold, the central INSEK nav chip aboard all 3 USVS automatically switched to dead reckoning mode, navigating purely by inertial guidance without any satellite or RF input. Unit number 5, equipped with magnetic field mapping and terrain referencing modules, assumed the role of passive leader. It synchronized its heading using wave pattern drift and gyroscopic bias, then relayed short-range ultrasonic pulses under 1.2 miles to the other 2 craft. No voice, no radio. They moved through a blinding electromagnetic haze. 3 blind hunters, but pre-trained for this exact moment. Surface radars still saw nothing. The 3 Maguras ran barely 1.4 feet above water, composite-skinned, heat-silent, radio-silent. Gradually, they slipped out of the EW core. Systems slowly woke up, inertial data aligned. Magnetic orientation error under 4 degrees. Ultrasonic link stable, no drift. At the launch waypoint, the true weapons were revealed. The FPV drones on deck received final configuration commands. The Maguras had breached the jamming ring. No suppression, no counterfire, no missiles required. With stored interference maps and static vector control, they drifted undetected straight into the heart of Russia's exclusion zone. 3 gray hulls cut the water. Each carried 4 hidden blades beneath its deck, locked into launch bays. Constant speed, constant bearing. No evasive action. They weren't coming to survive. They were coming to end survival for others. The trio of Magura 55s reached their preset coordinates, less than 5.9 miles from Tuzla. The sea stayed calm, no transmissions, no course corrections. Each USV carried 4 kamikaze FPV drones locked under its deck. Their configuration: heavy-frame 9-inch FPV drones, reinforced steel chassis derived from racing prototypes. Each quadrotor ran a 4-prop motor array powered by LiPo 6S 8,000 mAh batteries. Every unit was strapped with a TM-62M anti-tank mine, modified by Kyiv engineers. Armor shell removed, casing lightened, retaining only 14 pounds of TNT for optimal balance and payload efficiency. Once inertial sensors confirmed launch coordinates, the deck release mechanism engaged. In under 10 seconds, all 12 drones launched simultaneously, racing just above the sea in dispersed formation. No control signals, no radio. Each had been pre-programmed. All they needed was to fly straight. However, just as the USVs completed their launch cycle, now dangerously close to occupied coastline, the fire control radar of a Pantsir S-1 system on Tuzla suddenly picked up reflections from 3 ultra-low objects over the water. The system switched to emergency engagement mode. Within seconds, 3 missiles were fired, followed by a torrent of 30mm autocannon bursts crossing each other's trajectories. The lead Magura took the first hit, a direct explosion that shattered it across the surface. The second was ripped apart by cannon shells, flipping and disintegrating upon impact with the waves. The last pushed forward for a few hundred more meters, engulfed in flames, before sinking beneath the surf. All of it happened in under 6 seconds. 3 USVs destroyed, no signal returned. But above them, the blades had already been thrown. Russian command issued a terminate all targets order, unaware they had just destroyed the sheaths, while the swords were already free. 12 kamikaze FPV drones had escaped Pantsir's engagement cone, flying low and fast toward their targets. The carriers were gone, but their deadliest offspring, airborne charges of TNT, pressed onward. No retreat, no warning, no time to react. 12 suicide drones raced toward Tuzla Island at altitudes under 23 feet. No armor, no evasion, no return path. Each with a single order: reach target, destroy target. As they entered attack range, electronic interference thickened. GNSS vanished entirely. UHF waves tangled into a gray blur, but their inertial guidance and optical sensors held steady. None of the drones slowed down. On the ground, Russian EW posts continued broadcasting along the coast, but no alerts reached the main radar compound. Reload procedures for the Pantsir S-1 missiles had just begun. The guns had gone silent, the launch tubes were lowering, and technicians were rearming. The entire system would remain unable to react for at least 40 seconds. Within just a few kilometers, the interference wall was pierced. The drones switched to thermal imaging and preset inertial routes. No more adjustments. Each had chosen its target long before leaving the mothership. The 2 lead drones locked onto the Nebo M radar complex, the largest structure in the air defense grid. 6 others broke off to strike 2 Podlet K-1 stations, 3 per site, aiming for both directional antennas and control cabins. The remaining 4 climbed slightly, looping around to exploit any blind spots if the first wave failed. No sirens, no alarms. No one on the Russian side realized that their entire primary radar network had already fallen within the kill zone. The 4 lead drones advanced in a wedge formation, hugging the waterline before simultaneously climbing at 1.5 miles from the target. No evasion, no spread, each locked onto a different segment of the Nebo M radar complex. The target structure was large, easy to track, and uncamouflaged. The main rotating antenna was mid-sweep, still elevated. Below it, the control cabin and power container sat side by side in a fixed layout, unchanged from reconnaissance imagery captured the night before. The first UAV struck the antenna base directly. It pierced the steel braces below and detonated on impact. One leg of the mast buckled, tilting the rotation array by nearly 10 degrees before sparks flared and the mechanism shut down. The second UAV hit the roof of the control cabin. Its HEI warhead punched through the composite shell and exploded within the internal systems. The blast exit blew open the rear signal panel. The remaining 2 drones veered 15 degrees and hit the power unit and cooling systems. A secondary explosion followed the impact, sending up a narrow but thick black plume of smoke. Within 7 seconds, the NEBO-M system was completely neutralized. No technician response, no signal reroute. No one on the Russian side realized their primary eye had just been blinded. 2 seconds after the NEBO-M strike, the remaining 8 drones dove in, skimming past concrete revetments toward the 2 Podlet K1 radar stations. Each group split into 2 pairs. One pair targeted the main rotating antenna, the other slammed into the control cabin. No delays, no interference from command and control. At the northern Podlet K1 unit, the first 2 UAVs slammed into the rectangular antenna, tilted at a 35-degree angle. The direct hit snapped the rotation axle, triggering an immediate explosion. The shattered antenna broke in half, falling directly onto the cabin below. The second pair of UAVs struck the left side of the control cabin, the area housing the signal processing suite. The steel housing shuddered as if hammered. The cabin's roof blew off, flames erupted briefly, and then choked out in thick black smoke. At the second Podlet unit, the outcome was identical. The UAV pair attacking the antenna struck the elevation arm, collapsing the entire rotating array. Debris flew over 65 feet. The control cabin was hit on its exposed right flank. No barriers protected it. A section of the shell was torn open. The backup solar array caught fire, igniting the electronics inside. 2 small explosions followed, not enough to collapse the structure, but more than enough to destroy every circuit board. Less than 12 seconds after the first drones were launched, all 3 radar stations, the NEBO-M and both Podlet K1s, were eliminated from the regional air defense network. No antennas remained functional, no cabins emitted signals. Tuzla Island's long-range surveillance capability had gone completely dark. Just 16 seconds after the final explosion, the command post on the Crimean coast detected a total loss of communication with the Tuzla radar cluster. A status check was dispatched through backup channels. No reply. An Orlan 10 reconnaissance drone was scrambled from Jankoy Air Base following an emergency flight path. At the same time, a Raptor-class patrol boat left port from Kerch, heading toward the island. The internal emergency beacon at Tuzla was activated, not to signal combat readiness, but to request rescue, but it was already too late. Russian technical teams on the island managed to drag only 1 radar operator from a burning cabin. The other 6 had vanished. The Pantsir S-1 missile platforms remained half-loaded. The retaliation order was frozen. Every defense contingency had assumed the radar would still be intact. On the other side, the Ukrainian strike team sent no victory signal. No comms were reactivated. The entire sequence, from the USV departure to UAV launches to the final strike, had occurred under complete radio silence. A blind corridor opened on Ukraine's battlefield map, stretching over 28 miles from Zatoka's coast to the waters near Kerch. No radar waves, no alert systems, no early warning. The entire troop and logistics transit line across the Crimean Bridge now lay exposed to the next wave of attacks. Electronic warfare, air defenses, radar infrastructure, all neutralized in under 1 minute. No cruise missiles, no fighter jets. Just 1 team of USVs, a swarm of kamikaze drones, and a strategy calibrated to the last kilometer. Mission completed. Exactly 11:25 p.m., October 13, 2025. A cold launch order was transmitted directly to a hidden field control room in the town of Izium, Kharkiv Oblast. At the center of the bunker, the technical team, codenamed Legion, wearing FPV goggles, gave the go-ahead the moment the attack signal arrived. Within 15 seconds, 80 kamikaze FPV drones came to life simultaneously. Launched from preset platforms across the secure zone near the border, propeller engines roared as the drones shot skyward. The target, Arzama's substation, one of the three most critical energy hubs in the Nizhny Novgorod region of southwestern Russia. This station supplies power to more than 250,000 households daily, located deep inside Russia's safe zone, and shielded by multiple layers of air defense systems worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Moscow believed it was untouchable, but Ukraine was about to show them what modern warfare looks like. With a swarm of decoy drones, 20 surgical strike vectors, and a plan calibrated to the centimeter, the 80 drones were divided into 4 groups, each consisting of 20 UAVs, taking off in perfect 10-second intervals after crossing the border. The first swarm of decoy UAVs immediately broke formation. These 60 decoy drones were cobbled together from reinforced 5-inch steel frames, a batch of DJI Mavic 3s smuggled from Poland, and several defective kamikaze drones, all fused into the opening act of a hellish script, Chaos. Split into clusters, flying at varied altitudes and attacking from multiple vectors, the radar screen of the 91 N6E tracking system instantly began to overload. Russian radar operators initially thought it was a system glitch, but after 15 seconds, warning flags flooded the display. They scrambled to draft a report for command. Speed: 93 miles per hour, approximately 150 kilometers per hour. Altitudes range from 164 to 328 feet, 50 to 100 meters. Radar cross-sections, RCS, varied between 0.01 and 0.1 square meters. Not birds, not weather anomalies. The AI classifier concluded UAVS. Inside the C2 room, what was once dismissed as noise now became red alerts. The threat classification system flagged small cross-section targets, a drone swarm, not worth using large missiles. Solution: mid-range Panzer S-1 interceptors. What was unfolding wasn't a suicide mission. It was cold mathematical warfare in the 21st century. In Kiev, satellite imagery from Maxar and Planet Labs had mapped every rooftop, transformer, and fuel tank, turning the Artemis grid into a digital kill list updated weekly. A volley of 57 E-6E interceptor missiles roared from 4 Panzer S-1 batteries, surging straight toward the wall of drones Ukraine had created. The Teller-mounted fire control system locked on. Targets were within 15,700 feet, approximately 4,800 meters. 10 seconds to impact. Russia's reaction played out exactly as Kiev had predicted. As interceptors collided with the drone swarm, dozens of small fireballs erupted mid-air. The sky briefly lit up with flares and the debris of UAV carcasses rained onto the terrain below. Each decoy drone cost less than $600 to build, but the return on investment? Astounding. For just $36,000, Ukraine forced Russia to burn through 48 Panzer missiles while simultaneously blinding, jamming, and fragmenting its regional radar systems. But above all, the drones opened a corridor, a clear, unguarded attack lane for the main strike group, using the oldest trick in the book, stealing every pair of eyes. It was like looking through a hotel door peephole. You can see who's knocking, but you have no idea what's below their waistline. And under that metaphorical door frame, 20 AN-196 Lyuchi attack drones were creeping forward at an altitude of just 98 feet, approximately 30 meters. Meanwhile, the Russian side, they were cheering, unaware that what they had just destroyed was only an empty shell. The real threat was now steady, silent, and deadly. At 4:11 a.m., with the Artemis target just 18 miles, approximately 30 kilometers away, 20 AN-196 Lyuchi kamikaze UAVs began entering the final engagement envelope. On Ukrainian intelligence maps, this sector was marked in red. A mobile Tor M2 radar unit positioned near Auxiliary Distribution Station number 3, adjacent to the internal railway line. Danger zone: 10 miles, approximately 16 kilometers, radius with a reaction time of only 6 to 8 seconds. But these were no longer ordinary drones. Each AN-196 was equipped with the Griffon KINS inertial navigation module, a domestically built derivative of an Israeli MIL spec chipset, achieving guidance errors under 26 feet, approximately 8 meters, allowing for GPS-independent flight. The exterior was coated in radar-absorbing material, RAM, a composite of epoxy, ferrite, and carbon fiber, reducing radar cross-section, RCS, to just approximately 0.03 square meters, smaller than a 60-millimeter mortar shell. At the nose of each drone sat a passive scattering blade module, designed to disperse radar reflections and distort waveforms, preventing TOR's radar from locking onto them effectively within an EW-contaminated environment. The TOR M2 activated its radar. The signal processor instantly picked up faint, flickering contacts, flying low, under 130 feet, approximately 40 meters. The system's auto-classifier labeled them as low-altitude noise, suspicious, unconfirmed. The crew withheld fire. Meanwhile, the 20 AN-196 initiated their final suppression phase, reducing speed to 68 miles per hour, approximately 110 kilometers per hour, and dropping altitude to just 65 feet, approximately 20 meters, below the TOR's main scan plane. Over the next 90 seconds, the entire TOR M2 defensive shell was bypassed, without a single round fired. The AN-196s maintained total radio silence, no image feed, no command ping, relying solely on dual-core onboard processors to calculate range, terrain, and crosswinds like autonomous Kiev-born warriors. At 4:17 a.m. in the final 10 miles, approximately 16 kilometers to the target, an eastern-positioned Buk M2 launcher linked to a Kupol 9S 18M13 surveillance radar began scanning. It had the range to detect low-flying objects if they emitted signals. Buk M2, unlike TOR M2, didn't wait for close contact. Kupol picked up weak interference at range, bearing 210 degrees, altitude below 165 feet, approximately 50 meters, speed 80 to 95 miles per hour, approximately 130 to 150 kilometers per hour. The track was faint, but consistent. Still, the Buk team held fire. The system flagged classification, possible low-band interference, RCS less than 0.05 square meters, insufficient lock confidence. They had no idea what was coming wasn't a swarm of consumer-grade quadcopters. Each AN-196 Luchi R4 variant carried a Foxtail 2 anti-locking module, a frequency-deforming radar reflection chip. When Buk tried to lock on, the drone returned out-of-phase reflections, disrupting the radar's echo stability. The system couldn't reach sufficient track confidence. The Buk didn't fire. Each drone's ram skin, a multi-layer epoxy ferrite carbon composite, absorbed 60 to 70% of incoming X-band radiation. Wing edges were constructed from non-structural composite materials, scattering radar waves rather than reflecting them, shredding radar profiles during standard bank maneuvers. They held steady at 85 miles per hour, approximately 140 kilometers per hour, no ping, no feed, flying blind by high-resolution digital terrain maps, guided by MEMS 6-axis micro-INS units. At this point, Buk had stopped tracking. Kupol radar continued sweeping, but there was nothing clean left to lock. The sky ahead, just 6 miles, approximately 10 kilometers from Arzimas, had become a radar void. As they reached the final release point, 5 miles approximately 8 kilometers from the substation, a R330ZH Jetel jammer was running silently nearby, flooding L1 and L2 bands, blacking out all satellite positioning, civilian or military, within an 18-mile, 30 kilometers radius, but Ukraine had predicted this. The primary navigation core on each AN-196 Lyuti was the Griffin KI system, an advanced micro-INS suite with integrated pressure sensors, paired with high-resolution 3D terrain maps. Each drone also featured a trajectory correction system using infrared visual terrain matching, comparing ground features in real time to stored imagery. It required no GPS. It needed no operator. The effectiveness of Russia's electronic warfare, nearly zero. At 4:23 a.m., the Arzimas substation emerged into view through the backup optical camera mounted on each drone's nose. At that moment, bursts of Zu-23 autocannon fire rang out from an auxiliary building. A makeshift anti-aircraft team had opened fire after spotting an unidentified object overhead. The entire site had only 2 Zu-23 setups mounted on manual tripods, fired by eyeballing. No fire control radar, no thermal optics. One UAV was hit. A shell tore through its fuselage, causing an in-air explosion. But the others had already slowed and dropped to just 15 meters, approximately 49 feet above ground, weaving through tree lines in pairs at 68 miles per hour, approximately 110 kilometers per hour. Far too fast for human gunners to track with hand-cranked weapons. The UAVs split into 5 strike teams, each aiming for pre-assigned static coordinates. Group 1, main transformers. Group 2, capacitor banks and high-voltage breakers. Group 3, SCADA control building. Group 4, fuel depot. Group 5, transmission towers. Only 30 seconds remained, and Ukraine was about to complete a precision strike on strategic infrastructure nearly 500 miles, 800 kilometers, behind enemy lines. No satellites, no stealth bombers, just cheap, surgical, emotionless blades. One precise hit, and the entire substation would be knocked offline instantly. More than 600,000 Russian civilians who lit their homes using power from Arzamas were now left with 2 choices: eat dinner before sundown, or line up outside supermarkets under signs reading, "Candles sold out." At 4:25 a.m., all in 196 strike teams simultaneously pushed to max throttle. Engines burned through their last drops of fuel. A spearhead lunged forward, detonating, tearing, accelerating to 136 miles per hour, approximately 220 kilometers per hour. The first AN-196 cluster slammed directly into Arzamas's primary 230 kilovolt transformers. Each UAV carried a 55-pound, approximately 25-kilogram HEI warhead, packed to deliver both penetration and incendiary blast. At 1,470 feet, approximately 450 meters out, the group dove sharply, a 15-degree wing fold, nose angled down, and the HEI warheads entered arming phase. Infrared belly sensors registered a glowing white hotspot, the transformer core operating at full load. Upon impact with the 12mm steel shielding, the HEI charge punched through using a copper-lined shaped cone. 0.25 seconds later, the warhead exploded inside the 30,000-liter oil-insulated tank. The first detonation released a thermal pulse of 4,700 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 2,600 degrees Celsius, vaporizing the surrounding oil instantly. Sudden pressure expansion ruptured the casing. The unit blew apart like a steel artillery shell. Strike Team 2, approaching from the northeast at a 45-degree offset to avoid heat and smoke from the first strike, used live infrared mapping to lock targets. The Technical Operations Building, the SCADA hub, tin roofing coated in insulation, 2-story reinforced brick and light concrete structure. They attacked in unison. A clean wing fold, a dive straight into the second-floor window housing the primary SCADA control cabinets. The confined blast reverberated off concrete walls, generating a reverse pressure shockwave that tore the roof clean off. Strike Team 3 suddenly nosedived like a hawk in a killing swoop. No lights, no emissions. The night sky remained silent until a deep, sharp explosion ripped through it. The blast shattered the western wall, ejecting the roof and triggering a chain reaction in nearby capacitor banks and secondary transformers. A fireball soared 98 feet, approximately 30 meters, into the air, painting the northern skyline in red. Thick black smoke poured into access corridors. Ambient temperatures surged. Later thermal satellite imagery showed the zone glowing white-hot in the infrared spectrum, reaching over 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 900 degrees Celsius, at ground zero. Team 4 struck the 220 kilovolt grid intake and feed station on the compound's southeastern side. Within 6 seconds, the first sound emerged, a metallic crunch, followed by a high-intensity detonation that shook the substation's reinforced concrete foundation. Power was cut instantly, and the entire city of Arzamas plunged into total blackout within 30 seconds. Team 5 arrived amidst the chaos. They weren't the main thrust, they were the finishers with a simple, ruthless task. When everything burns, make sure nothing can come back. Flames surged violently, consuming the auxiliary wing. Smoke thickened, laced with the choking stench of burning oil. Fire Station Number 14, located 2.5 miles, approximately 4 kilometers away, declared a Level 3 emergency. The first fire truck, a Kamazi 43,114, arrived quickly but had to stop 656 feet, approximately 200 meters, from the gate due to extreme heat and secondary blasts from incompletely detonated capacitor banks. In Moscow, no official statement was released. The Ministry of Defense stayed silent. Rossetti, operator of the Arzimas power grid, twisted the facts in its first press release. A major technical incident caused by internal short-circuiting. The cause is under investigation. But on the ground, the truth burned black in every rising plume. In Kyiv, there was no press conference, no declaration of victory, no need for symbols. Nothing more needed to be said. They were done, and they knew. Another call would come. Another mission would need them, soon. Mission completed. At 3:30 a.m., October 16, 2025, 50 Ukrainian loitering munitions closed on a target located roughly 125 miles from Ukraine's border. At an altitude of only approximately 20 meters, they were effectively invisible to the region's most expensive air defense network. Each carried a single warhead of 11 pounds with one mission: strike Lauren, a large tanker belonging to Russia's so-called Dark Fleet. From altitude, precisely 11,400 feet, the EO/IR sensors on a PD-2 reconnaissance UAV had tracked the ship for more than 2 hours. A deck temperature of 122 degrees Fahrenheit lit the whole picture. 160,000 tons of Urals crude had been loaded on deck and was steaming out of Novorossiysk. A secret sale contract between Russia and India, the last fiscal lifeline for Putin's cash-strapped war chest. 50 simultaneous attack vectors launched from forward staging areas around the Zaporizhzhia field base hours earlier. A swarm of expendables, UJ-22s, AN-196s, and a batch of modified DJI Mavics, each fitted with an HE warhead holding 11 pounds of TNT equivalent. Black blood exchanged for cold transfers through Dubai banks, funding artillery, filling fuel trucks, keeping tanks in the fight and the war grinding on. No radar returns, no radio command signatures, no sound. They rode terrain at 65 feet like a razor sliding under the Russian defense throat. Their entire transit, from launch to the literal approaches, was a complete blind spot. Only when they closed to roughly 6.2 miles did faint jamming blips begin to flicker on scope. The S-400 radar crew watched frame by frame in the ops room, seeing what looked like a flock of migratory birds. Then the birds suddenly vanishing and reappearing in pattern. Even a rookie knew no flock could sustain perfect formation and a flight path headed straight for the region's largest seaport. From first radar detection to the swarm reaching the kill zone, 4 minutes. 4 minutes for a Russian crew to choose, not to save the harbor, but to protect what Moscow did not want exposed. 12 interceptor rounds, 57 E-6-E, lit the rails and accelerated toward Mach 4. The Ukrainian drones didn't care. They dove to just 23 feet, hugging the sea more than ever, slipping below the horizon of early warning radars. Kiev's confidence was simple. Panzer's interceptors use semi-active guidance. They don't home autonomously. They require a ground station to update target data every 5 seconds. The ground station lost all signal. Russian command watched helplessly as millions of dollars worth of missiles went blind, searching in the dark. All they had was the last known fix for 50 small signatures. The 57 E-6E warheads detonated. Some 40,000 fragments sprayed into the sky in a 26-feet radius. Russia's $4 million intercept salvo cost them everything. The fragments only clipped a few decoy drones worth under $600 apiece. In a camouflage command vehicle in Vilnyansk, Zaporizhzhia, an SBU strike cell glued their eyes to pixels on a screen. When their loitering swarm reached the attack point, Commander Alpha issued one clean, cold order: burn. The hive accelerated, propulsors at full power. 50 expendables, Beaver UJ-22, AN-196, and a handful of homemade 7-inch steel frames left over from previous sorties, launched from dispersed pads around the town. Launch elements maintained precise 325 feet spacing, forming a multi-layered attack formation. Programmed to operate as independent warriors with no further command, each drone elected its own axis and pressed like it had intent. The Russian watch team still didn't understand. Their interceptors had detonated, but they had no intercept tracks. Screens blinked, targets appeared and vanished. The tanker had steamed 12.5 miles from the berth, engines warming, preparing to exit the blooded waters. If it made port, a bankrupt Russian economy would receive a direct $100 million credit from India. The combat order of battle: over 100,000 rounds of 152mm artillery to batter Avdiivka, Kupiansk, or Chasiv Yar for 2 weeks straight, would be replenished. 30 Iskander-M, or nearly 100 calibers, would be added to the Russian inventory. A fresh brigade of 50 T-72B3s might roll out. But Kiev was not there to wave the tanker off. In seconds, the swarm would send Lauren to the bottom. At 2,600 feet, the whine of the loitering munitions rose above the surf. On Lauren's deck, armed crew, FNMAGs, AKMS, and AR-style carbines swung barrels toward the incoming swarm. Small arms fired first. Tracer and shrapnel laced the air. 7.62mm rounds struck a few lead drones, igniting them as they plunged into the sea. The swarm kept coming, maintaining 23 feet altitude, skimming like blades, seeking a throat. A few fighters laced sudden lateral maneuvers to evade fire. The semi-autonomous flight controllers reacted faster than the gunners. Alpha split the swarm into 4 packages. Package 1 rode the port side, dropping to sea-skimming run lines, aiming for the lower deck where pressure valves and blow-off lines sat exposed. The weak seam where a small detonation could turn a pressure system into a reverse blast. Package 2 came at the midships deck and the 6 main cargo tanks. Each drone ran a corkscrew profile, pop high, then dive vertically to optimize penetration angle for a heavy warhead. The aim wasn't to hole a compartment, but to trigger a sympathetic detonation that would cascade thermal and overpressure across the ship. Package 3 hugged the stern, tooling for auxiliary engineering spaces and emergency power systems. They impacted junctions between generators and fuel runs. They often missed wiring and plumbing in defense diagrams. Their warheads employed a 0.8-second delayed detonation on impact, a brief latency to ensure the charge punched through shell before functioning inside the hull. Package 4 flew slightly higher to sow chaos, forcing the crew to split their fire just as the others struck. A soft ping in Alpha's headset confirmed. All target locks green, self-destruct sequences armed. No one aboard Lauren understood that within heartbeats the Black Sea would run red, not with blood, but with black blood. The fuel the world craves, and Ukraine would not permit to leave the battlefield. One last ping, then absolute silence. In 0.2 seconds, the port package triggered shaped charges. A fusillade of flame punched through roughly 16 millimeters of lower deck steel, breaching a pressure valve and initiating an emergency response, already too late. Midships contact. Suicide dives like birds of prey. Warheads pierced outer tank skins, embedding into unheated crude. When the internal charges detonated, each tank became a reverse pressure reaction chamber, ejecting tongues of fire across the deck. Stern hits struck the emergency power complex. The blast shorted critical electronics. Controls died. The ship listed, opening paths for heat and burning oil to reach previously unaffected holds. Lauren shuddered. Cargo tanks ruptured. A fire column shot upward to about 295 feet. The tanker was now nothing but a burning mass of metal. The ship's paint had melted. The sea around the hull began to boil as burning oil spread. The entire blast lasted less than 20 seconds, but it left a fireball recorded in real time by commercial satellites. Black smoke rose hundreds of meters, enough for NASA MODIS sensors to register a false wildfire alert. The first blaze erupted from Deck 3, where the loading pumps were located, and it raced along fuel lines like gasoline poured onto a tinderbox. Steel exceeded its temperature tolerance in only 90 seconds. Plates cracked and warped as internal pressure spiked. Fuel tanks began to rupture en masse. The entire crew transmitted distress signals, but it was hopeless. No rescue helicopters, no Coast Guard. The area had been sealed under a technical operations order from the Russian Ministry of Defense. No one was allowed near. One by one, men jumped into oil-slicked water, their skin coated in black Urals crude. No one could call for help. Lauren's bow sank completely beneath the waves. Fire still burned aft like a giant torch planted in the Black Sea. Final bubbles rose and burst on the oily surface. The moment 160,000 tons of black blood slipped beneath the waves, and a deadly silence fell from both Moscow and New Delhi. Nobody understood precisely what had happened. No radar gave a clear alarm. Only one fact remained. The tanker Lauren was gone. Inside the sound-insulated command truck, the firing control cell of Rocket Brigade 19 remained glued to the screens. On the electronic displays, there were only pressure and thermal graphs. A red marker read, "Confirmed action, primary detonation, secondary detonation." Ship, port, fuel, not a school, not a hospital, no civilian casualties. We just cut an artery. In New Delhi, it was early, but Energy and Foreign Affairs desks immediately went to red alert. Within less than 6 minutes of the blast, 160,000 tons of Urals, roughly $100 million worth, had been consumed in a black column of flame. On domestic markets, Brent crude spiked, but New Delhi's deeper concern was the rupture of international trust. At the Kremlin, 6 a.m. Moscow time, an emergency session lit the second basement war room of the General Staff. A single image filled the main screen, a smoke column hundreds of meters high from Lauren's wreck. One order followed: absolute silence. State media were instructed, do not name the vessel, do not run images, confirm nothing. The Ministry of Defense issued a terse, obfuscating line: a technical incident at the port area. No foreign factor, situation under control. But at the Black Sea Fleet, nobody believed technical incident. The smell of burning oil hung thick in the air. A black sheen coated the water. An emergency investigative team from the FSB and Rosgvardia was dispatched. But instead of hunting perpetrators, their mission was different: erase traces, collect drone wreckage, and ensure that no one, including foreign media, gained access to the remaining hulk. Because if the world learned that a swarm costing mere tens of thousands of dollars had penetrated a layered air defense network and destroyed a 160,000-ton tanker belonging to one of Moscow's friendliest states, it would be a strategic humiliation, a stab at Russian naval honor, and a blow to the fragile trust of the last remaining allies. Mission completed.
25th of October 2025, a merchant vessel flying an Iranian flag carrying 550 tons quietly berthed at Olya Port, Astrakhan region, Russia. According to Reuters, inside were not civilian goods. More than 400 short-range ballistic missiles, the Thoth-360, had been transferred from Tehran to Moscow, a public, explicit act of support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This resupply shipment was destined for the Western Front, where Russian artillery formations were collapsing under severe logistic shortages after sanctions choked domestic supplies. Tactical ammunition stocks in Voronezh, Rostov, and Belgorod could no longer self-replenish. The precise time and birth of this weapons load had already been in U.S. intelligence hands, and the information was passed straight to Kyiv. That is why, at 5:50:14 AN 196 Lyuty, loitering munitions were launched from southeast Ukraine, flying continuously more than 700 kilometers and close to within 10 kilometers of the target. They were operated by Team 14, a special unit of Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, GUR. Each UAV measured nearly 3 meters in length, with a fuselage built from fiberglass reinforced composite, ultra-light structure. They were effectively radar transparent, vanishing from Russian long-range surveillance screens designed to detect medium or high-altitude traffic. The Russian techs on watch kept running their shift like any other, or at least they thought they were. At the approach point, 3 kilometers from target, the final attack order was issued over a one-way encrypted channel. The formation immediately changed posture. Attack nodes that had dispersed from 4 directions simultaneously dove in. executing a hard terminal pull-down. The lead AN-196 switched on its IR camera and recorded the scene, a chaotic staging yard, Russian military trucks busily lining up to receive a weapons consignment valued at more than $50 million. On the ramp, dozens of Kamaz 6x6 trucks, each carrying 5 FATH 360 missiles, the Iranian ballistic round capable of sweeping a line of border villages with a single salvo. That sight, frame after infrared frame, was now fixed in the eyes of the UAV pack, like a predator seeing prey in the dawn haze. But the plan was not fly straight in and die. At 0015, the AN-196s lifted from concealed launch rails deep inside southeast Ukraine. At just 20 meters, deliberately below human sightlines and at the edge of radar sweep, the 14 UAVs split into 7 small cells of 2, moving in a rotating spoke pattern, expanding like concentric spirals. No GNSS emissions, no radio signatures, no chorus of synchronized engines. They closed like a silent, invisible killer pack. No GNSS emissions, no radio signatures, no chorus of synchronized engines. They closed like a silent, invisible killer pack. All radar returns on the scope looked like large birds flying low, scattered and non-threatening. They penetrated the entire early warning layer. Not a single AA round was fired. Only when approximately 3 kilometers remained did every UAV cell simultaneously adjust course and turn toward the rendezvous point. 7 spearheads from 7 angles formed a concentric death net, tightening around the target. Spacing between UAVs was held with precision, forming a lethal coverage mesh over the entire port loading area. At that instant, Russian radars began to pick up faint streaks. Low, fast, not birds, not aircraft. Control stations initiated tracking modes, but every signal was fragmented. Low-altitude radar nodes were jammed. Automated control antennas were deceived. No warning siren sounded. No weapon system acquired in time. The UAV pack was in position. A synchronized strike. Silent, clean, surgical, unconditional. Range now, 3 kilometers. Short range 1, RS-2-1. E-radar began to resolve faint blips skimming at 20 meters altitude at roughly 165 kilometers per hour. Bird filter algorithms were defeated. The radar return flagged anomaly, ultra-low altitude, pattern irregular. Control panels flashed red. Pantsir S, 1 units at Olya, shifted to emergency posture. The first lock was achieved. The twin 30mm 2 A38M guns were prioritized. High rate fire, target arc widened. Track acquisition was augmented by IR cameras and electro-optical systems for degraded visibility conditions. But the UAVs did not fly in a neat formation. They were non-synchronous, non-collinear. Instead of one vector, they fanned out, simulating chaotic flight paths to deny Panzer target discrimination. The automatic system selected the strongest radar return, but the UAV skins were fiberglass composite, with radar cross-sections only 0.04 to 0.05 square meters, roughly equivalent to a large seagull. Theoretical Panzer reaction timings: detect at 3,000 meters, lock in approximately 1.5 seconds, turret traverse 90 degrees per second, full system response 4 to 5 seconds. But with attackers closing from 7 vectors, the system could only lock 1 or 2 targets per time slice. Target overload effects began. The second battery switched to missile mode, preparing to fire 2 57E6 short-range interceptors. Before target data could be registered, the internal signal network was disrupted. One lead UAV carried light electronic warfare suppression gear, jamming the control link frequencies between the fire radar and the weapon computer. In 2 to 3 seconds, the inner Panzer coordination collapsed into isolated gun crews, severed from C2. AN-196 No. 3 was struck by gunfire, detonating mid-air in a flash. The remaining pack did not falter. They continued, committing to terminal dives, extinguishing nav lights, and entering final attack profiles. Pantsir's reaction was reduced to instinct: shoot where you see a flare, but continuous locking was impossible. The last 2 kilometers closed. The strike was imminent. Russia had only seconds to stop it. Too late. The rear 30mm battery continued firing intermittent bursts. Futile. The UAV swarm slipped out of Pantsir S-1 engagement envelopes and closed on the staging area where over 400 FAT-360 missiles were being loaded onto tarped Kamaz 6x6 trucks. At the container yard, the two lead UAVs dived to an altitude of just 26 feet, engines screaming as they tore through the air. The Russian soldiers, armed only with AK-12 and a few PKMS, froze for a split second at the strange sound. A maintenance worker turned his head. His eyes caught the faint red streak in the sky. Too late. The internal alarm wailed, at least 4 to 5 seconds behind the moment the drones entered human line of sight. The port security detachment, about 18 men, scattered on instinct, drawing their weapons while trying to identify a direction. But there was no fixed target. A N196 number 4 rammed straight into a Kamaz truck carrying 5 uncovered FAT-360s. The first explosion shook the ground. Fire erupted nearly 65 feet high, engulfing the munitions yard. The fifth UAV veered left and slammed into the auxiliary fuel container zone. A second fireball bloomed, temperature spiking to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, blowing up the tankers and the maintenance bay. Within the first 0.7 seconds, flames crawled along the exposed launch tubes filled with unstable solid propellant, triggering a primary blast roughly equal to 110 pounds TNT. But 2.3 seconds later, pressure and fragments from that blast struck the adjacent Kamaz, fully loaded with 5 newly offloaded missiles. This was no ordinary detonation. It became an uncontrolled acceleration burn. The solid propellant ignited inside the truck body, pressure exceeded structural limits, and the missile frames ruptured. A second blast followed at less than 16 feet distance, twice as powerful as the first. In under 10 seconds, 4 Kamaz trucks were incinerated. Fire and shockwaves hurled unmounted missiles across the yard. Several drones hit troop clusters handling the missiles. Fragments and blast waves ripped through the formation, a few men killed instantly. Within the next 4 seconds, the entire port turned into a pocket inferno. Heat waves, black smoke, and metal shards spewed from unfired FAT-360 launch tubes, causing chain detonations across the staging area. The rear power substation tripped offline, plunging the zone into a dim red glow. Radio command collapsed. Security cameras went dark. Internal comms devolved into scattered screams. Russian forces at the port were overwhelmed. In less than 15 seconds after the UAVs crossed 1,600 feet, 6 detonations had erupted. The missile truck cluster was destroyed, and the logistics hub lay paralyzed. Remaining strike elements picked surviving Kamaz launchers as landing points. UAV number 09 locked onto a truck 360 feet away, its launch tubes half-loaded. Just a brush of its HEI warhead tip against the truck's flank, and it blew. The blast tore through the midsection where 2 FAT-360s without guidance kits were stowed. The penetration plus incendiary effect turned the vehicle into a blazing torch. The entire Olya port in Astrakhan Oblast was engulfed in smoke and flame. From above, satellite imagery showed the blast zone spreading over 980 feet wide, stretching along the container lanes and logistics yard. The port's fire brigade triggered its internal alarm. 3 Kamaz AR, 2 class fire trucks, each carrying 6 rapid response firefighters, sped toward the inferno via the western service route. But surface temperatures at ground zero exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel melted, asphalt cracked open. Truck number 2 was forced to halt at approximately 590 feet as heat shattered the windshield and ignited the protective paint layer. Ambulance teams from the Port Clinic and the Astrakhan Civil Response Center were ordered forward. Yet all communications within an approximately 1 kilometer radius went dark when flames consumed the relay tower. A Mi-8 medevac helicopter was prepared to launch from Astrakhan Airfield, but remained grounded. The port area had yet to confirm a safe landing zone. Black smoke rose 1,300 feet high, clearly visible in NASA's MODIS imagery and Iran's Khayyam low-orbit satellite. Less than 2 hours after the explosions, national television channels aired a brief bulletin. A minor fuel leak fire broke out in the technical section of Olya Port. No casualties reported. The situation is under control. No mention of UAVs, no mention of the burned-out convoy. No word about the FAT-360 missiles that had detonated on those Kamaz trucks. At the same time, an unidentified technical team arrived from Astrakhan. No insignia, no military plates, carrying signal jamming devices and sealed specialist vehicles. The blast zone was completely sealed off. Witnesses were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. Every civilian camera feed around the port was tampered with. 24 hours of footage simply vanished. Some UAV fragments were collected and transported to Technical Base 825 in Volgograd. The media never knew. 4 hours after the explosion, a small military convoy quietly departed Olya, hauling the few surviving missiles inland through bypass routes beyond oversight. In Tehran, emergency meetings convened. The Iranian Ministry of Defense ordered a full review of all Caspian transport lines. The Foreign Ministry summoned the Russian ambassador, every word recorded in silence. Tehran understood perfectly. This was not merely a strike on Russia. It was a message aimed directly at Iran and at the covert weapons pipeline flowing across the Caspian Sea. The strike was surgical, precise, cold, merciless, a preemptive blow, and a warning. From this moment, every supply route from Iran across the Caspian lies within the kill zone. Ukraine issued no claim. The Ministry of Defense in Kyiv stayed silent. No tweets, no press briefings. On the electronic operations map, Olya Port was marked by a single crossed-out symbol. At 4:55 a.m. over the Black Sea, the electronic intelligence ship Ivan Kurs, a Project 18,280 class vessel of the Russian Navy, was patrolling its usual route over the Black Sea, roughly 86 miles north of the Bosporus Strait. But Kyiv had no intention of negotiating. According to reports cited by Pravda and Militarny, the available information, photographs, and video footage all confirm that the Ivan Kurs sustained severe damage from a series of coordinated Ukrainian strikes. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, had already mapped the patrol pattern of the 4,000-ton reconnaissance ship. Behind the cover of a routine patrol, the vessel served a far greater purpose. The silent shield protecting Moscow's last lifeline, two strategic gas pipelines running under the Black Sea, Turkish Stream and Blue Stream. For a Russian economy suffocating under sanctions, those lines were the final veins still pumping life into the system. Together, Turkish Stream and Blue Stream move up to 48 billion cubic meters of gas a year, generating nearly $20 billion annually. Money that keeps Russia's exhausted banks breathing. The Kremlin knows one immutable truth. Whoever controls the pipelines controls Russia's last foothold in Europe. That is why, at 5:10 a.m. on October 25th, 3 Ukrainian kamikaze USVs were already closing in on the central Black Sea, just 12 miles from Ivan Kurs. They were Magura 55s, lethal unmanned surface vessels built specifically for asymmetric warfare. Each craft measured about 6 meters long, cruised at 50 miles per hour, and could travel more than 620 miles without refueling. Their ability to coordinate in formation made them the nightmare of the Russian fleet. Their hulls, made from epoxy composites, fiberglass, and carbon fiber, were coated in radar diffusive paint, rendering them nearly invisible against the sea's radar clutter. On Russian surveillance screens, they were nothing but faint static, indistinguishable from the waves themselves. They had departed Odessa Bay at midnight, launched from a covert GUR platform. While crossing through the radar envelope of Crimea's S-400 systems, everything unfolded exactly as planned. No response, no detection, no alert. At the 91N6E radar station of the S-400 battery near Sevastopol, the operators carried on as usual. They had no idea their screens had already been deceived. A few even poured the first shots of vodka for the morning shift. On the radar displays, everything looked perfectly normal. But out at sea, the 3 USVs skimmed the waves, holding a steady 50 miles per hour. No radio signal, no emissions, no warning. At 6.2 miles out, Ivan Kurs had slipped into a radar blind spot, completely outside the protection rings of Russia's defense grid. The pride of Russia's naval intelligence fleet now had only its navigation radar and a few light machine guns to face 3 suicide drones carrying over 1,980 pounds of explosives. No alarms sounded, no orders were given. It was just another quiet morning until everything changed. At 5:18 a.m., Ivan Kurs maintained its routine course through low visibility and dim dawn light. Navigation radar showed no anomalies. No one on deck noticed the 3 incoming shadows slicing through the sea. Beneath the surface, the 3 Magura V-5s advanced in a triangular assault formation. 1 led the strike, while 2 flanked to the left and right like the blades of a spinning rotor, spaced 980 feet apart. Their speed was 4 times faster than the Russian ships. Their hulls skimmed less than 3 feet above the water, leaving no radar echo, no radio trail, no foaming wake. The range fell to 5 miles, but the Russian crew still hadn't reacted. Surface radar detected nothing. The drone's returns were buried inside the ocean's natural interference. The antenna arrays didn't turn. The scopes remained clean. No one raised binoculars. No one stood ready at the guns. The left flank drone suddenly veered off course, creating a false radar trace to draw attention. The central drone locked its heading straight at the hull, aiming between the engine compartment and the communications room, where the ship's SIGINT array was concentrated. A faint blip flickered across Ivan Kur's radar. Brief, unclear. A technician leaned forward, staring at the screen, but the echo disappeared after 2 sweeps. He logged it as sea clutter. No reason for alarm. For the first time, the ship's infrared camera picked up a faint image, a low-profile object slicing the surface, leaving a thin white trail, speed unknown, target unclassified, no order to fire. The portside gunner turned his head and saw it. Black, low, and moving impossibly fast. Nothing like a fishing boat. He raised his finger to the trigger of the 14.5mm gun, but there was still no command to open fire. The bridge descended into confusion. Radar now displayed 3 simultaneous approach vectors. No more doubt, no more time. The alarm finally blared. The starboard gunner unlocked the breach, but with sea-skimming targets, effective range was near 0. The first burst of tracers screamed across the water and missed. The lead Magura 5-5 switched to terminal attack mode, throttling up to 56 miles per hour and charging straight for the hull. The other 2 swung wide, executing a cross-strike maneuver to split the ship's defensive fire. Distance dropped below 980 feet. The lead drone tilted its bow, aligning for a direct impact vector. Mounted on its nose was a directional warhead weighing 660 pounds, pre-programmed for a ram and detonate strike. Inside Ivan Kur's, alarm still screamed as the gunners scrambled for control. The firing order came too late. Survival time now counted in seconds. The 14.5mm barrels swung sluggishly, the target too small, too fast, hugging the sea surface. Impossible to lock on. The Magura No. 1 punched through the first burst of fire. A round tore the composite hull but did not deflect it. The USV's hull trembled, but its speed did not drop. On the starboard quarter, Magura No. 2 approached from the right flank, a crossing angle strike, simulating a secondary spear to draw fire away from the main axis. The deck-mounted machine gun swept instinctively and sprayed rounds and scored no hits. Magura No. 3 drove straight for the stern, where the ELINT antenna cluster, satellite navigation suites, and the ship's high data mast were concentrated. All 3 USVs were now inside approximately 100 meters range. "Cease fire! Prepare for impact!" rang out, but it was too late. Magura No. 1 rammed the port side, directly beneath the bridge. The impact sensor triggered and sent the detonation signal to the warhead. Immediate initiation. A white-orange fireball bloomed across the sea. Peak overpressure slammed laterally into the hull, producing a penetration effect nearly equal to approximately 1,000 kilograms of TNT, tearing open the second deck and ripping antenna arrays from their mounts. Magura No. 3 struck the stern. The blast hit the auxiliary engine room and the main power distribution trunk. The shock broke the No. 1 drive shaft. Flames began to crawl out of the machinery spaces. The ship listed slightly to starboard. Magura No. 2, despite taking 2 rounds, held its course. It skimmed past the first blast, swung in from the starboard, and punched through into the SIGINT receiver bank. The third detonation followed. A fire column taller than approximately 30 meters climbed skyward, snapping the main radar mast and shredding the radio room. Flames lanced through the hull and into the reserve fuel tanks. The entire ELINT SIGINT antenna suite was destroyed. The main electrical bus lost power. Water began flooding the decks as the ship listed. Emergency dewatering pumps engaged, but the pumps were dead. Black smoke rose from 2 burning points along the hull. The midships deck was catastrophically deformed by shock, warped and fractured. A naval officer was thrown overboard. His fate unknown. On the sea, fires still burned. Ivan Kurz lost all contact with Fleet Command. The main mast had been sheared off, the satellite transmitter melted, and military band radios answered nothing. Emergency control fell back to signal lamps and mechanical horns. Fire spread from Impact Point 2 into the auxiliary power room, igniting lithium battery racks and high-voltage cabling. A small secondary explosion occurred. Not massive, but it created an internal overpressure that blew sealed doors in the central engineering compartment. Black smoke began to push into the portside service corridors. Underdeck visibility collapsed. The semi-automatic firefighting system activated, but water mains had been ruptured by the third blast. The engineering watch reported the engine room was flooded, water pouring in fast through a hull breach below the waterline. The ship's list oscillated, bulkhead pressures rose, warning of imminent structural failure if balanced pumping was not restored within the next 2 minutes. Far off, from the Podlet K-1 coastal radar near Sevastopol, Command began to lose a coherent signal lock on the ship's hull. Telemetry faded to a single indeterminate thermal dot approximately 12 kilometers from the vessel's original position. Ivan Kurz, the Black Sea Fleet's premier electronic reconnaissance center, no longer had combat capability, no comms, no realistic chance of independent survival. A few life rafts auto-deployed, 8 crew able to move clambered to the uppermost deck, but the heat let them stand in place for no more than 30 seconds at a time. The sinking of Ivan Kurz was not merely a preemptive strike of firepower, it was a strategic knockout to Russia's Black Sea early warning architecture. The fleet's long-range electronic collection capability, centered on Project 18280, was severed instantly. The single node that allowed the Black Sea Fleet to cue land-based S-400 radars, monitor UAVs and USVs, and designate remote targets for Crimea's air defenses was neutralized in under 10 minutes. In a sea where surface warships were forced to hide and coastal radars were continually disrupted by drones, Ivan Kurz had been the Kremlin's last open eye. Now it lay burning and black. Moscow's response followed the wartime control of information playbook. No images, no confirmations, no public mourning. The only line from the Russian Ministry of Defense spoke of a repelled USV attack, no damage reported. 3 days later, satellite imagery showed a charred patch of sea over approximately 300 square meters with no trace of the reconnaissance ship. Rather than admit loss, Russia chose concealment. On the ground, however, the Black Sea had lost a critical tactical anchor. No official statement, no press conference, no footage of the USV launch. That was all Ukraine left behind after one of the Black Sea's most effective asymmetric strikes since the war began. No medals, no operator photos, no one to claim credit. For Kyiv, the attack was not for show. It was a reminder that in any stretch of water Russia deems safe, at any distance its radars assume secure, and at any hour when Russian crews think they can drink vodka on shift, knives under the surface are still moving, silently, relentlessly.